Hey, welders, ready to upgrade your gear and save some serious dough in the process? The Miller Build with Blue Savings and Rebate Program has you covered. Find amazing deals and cashback rebates on a wide range of Miller products, from welders to plasma cutters and everything in between, all backed by our 3-year warranty. Don't let this opportunity pass you by. Take advantage of the Miller Build with Blue program now. Visit us online or stop by your nearest Miller distributor today to start saving.
Okay, here we go for another episode of the Strange Motion Way podcast. I'm your host, Tim Strange, along with my hostess with the mostest,
Kerry Strange.
Tonight, we have another great industry person. We have a guy for over 25 years. He was the head dude at Street Rodder Magazine and much, much more at those companies we'll talk about. Now, at the In the Garage Media Group, where he is the editor of Modern Rodding Magazine. Some of his accolades in the industry is HRIA Hall of Fame, Detroit Autorama Circle of Champions, HRIA Lifetime Achievement, Grand National Roadster Show Hall of Fame, and that was just a few that I put down just to make sure we got some highlights here. So welcome, Brian Brennan. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Tim and Carrie. Thank you so much for inviting me on. I've been following some of your other podcasts, and my gosh, they're eclectic. They are fun and entertaining, and just when they take off is when they're great. So hopefully I won't embarrass you.
Yeah, we've been lucky to get some people that don't really do podcasts or don't really do interviews. We've been really lucky to get Tom Taylor. We're going to do a part 2 with Tom Taylor. We got Roger Berman, which right now Roger Berman is about leading the listens and the views of all we have had. So he doesn't do hardly interviews, so people really were interested to hear what Roger Berman had to say. So,
well, I mean, I can see that. Roger's a hell of a car builder, and it's not like he's only been at it for a week or two. I mean, he's been at it for a lot of years, built a lot of notable cars, had all the publicity in the world that you might want to get with them. So the fact that you got someone people don't see much, that's a good deal. So I'm going to be a letdown for you. So I'm sure people are tired.
You know, I grew up in the Midwest, so there's a few Midwest legends that I always looked up to and seen at the shows. Our next one we're trying to get scheduled is Dale Besh.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I've only met him a few times. He's always been fun and just gracious, and I love the cars he builds. So that's a winner.
So another cool thing, I was at the In the Garage Media bowling party that they do right before the Street Rod Nationals, and I was talking to Brian about being on the podcast. He goes, "Yeah, I'll do it." Well, then I showed him the logo that we talk about cats too. So he was like, "Oh, I'm in," and he instantly started. I think you started texting your wife, "I'm going to be on this Hot Rod podcast, and I'm okay to talk about cats." So we have a couple cats rolling around here, and they make appearance that a lot of our local or our regular listeners see them. And Axel's right down here now. Yes. So there's Axel. He's the 1-year-old. He's a little crazy. So whenever anybody hears the bell, that is him. So before we get going here, tell us about your cats.
Oh, geez. Well, we break them into 2 categories, indoors and outdoors. We have the OG, which is the original group, and that's Roxy and Molly and Chassis and Bumper and who am I missing? And Motor. Ah, yes, Motor's the big one of the group. Those are the indoors. And then on the outdoors, we've got Hubcap, and then we have a pet. It's not an armadillo. What is it? It's a possum. Yes, possums. And when I say they live outdoors, we feed them every day. They're up here at the back of the house right now waiting for dinner, and Kimmy takes care of that. So, and of course, we have also got Licorice and Pirate. Pirate because he's 3-legged. And Licorice, the 2 of them are pure black, and they're all just a little squirrely.
Yeah, they all have a different attitude. If you're not an animal person, you don't understand it. But every dog has a different personality. They're just like people. Every cat, the same thing. So can you pet your possum?
No, we can't pet him, but he will sit there and eat, and we can talk to him, and he won't run away. But if they've got a buffer zone, and you get inside that buffer, it's about 3 feet, and they're gone.
So hopefully your possum won't listen to this podcast, but we mentioned Roger Berman. One of his autocross cars has a license plate on the front of the car that says, "Eat more possum."
Yes, I know that. And that's a pretty common sight.
I was at the Lead Sled Spectacular this summer, and the DJs they have every year, they always have a pet possum. They have lost their pet possum from before because they don't really live that long, I guess. And they had a new less than 1 year old possum, and I have a picture of it sitting on my shoulder. They have weird little fingery grab things when they're on you.
Yeah.
Really weird. So, okay, let's start talking about some hot rod stuff. So, but one more thing about the cats. Did you know Ashley Talbert, Dan Webb's daughter?
Yes.
She runs an Instagram page with a couple other people called Cat Rodders. It's like garage cats. It's always hot rod stuff with cats. Yeah. So you have to check that out. It's really awesome. So we had her and Corey on before, and we talked about the cats. So
well, clearly that's become preferred reading now. So we'll have to get into that.
Okay, so let's strain your brain and go way back. As a little kid growing up, was your parents into hot rods or race cars or anything? How did you get the bug?
No, they weren't. But I had a neighbor, and he was into building hot rods. And I have to remember the era I come from. So when I was growing up was the 50s and 60s. So a lot of it was pre-muscle car and then the early muscle cars, which still are some of the most fun cars that were ever made. So I got to go over to his house, and he had a 62 Pontiac Grand Prix. That was his pride and joy that he always tinkered with. And all I ever did was I cleaned it and waxed it and vacuumed it out, just anything to be around the car. And when it came time to tinker, then he'd let me tinker, and that's how I learned about tools and car parts and whatnot.
How old were you about this time?
Well, I was, it was high school, so it would have been, freshman through senior year of high school. But what led up to that was my first car magazine I bought. I was somewhere between 8 and 10 years old, and it was Rod and Custom. And that's what got me into liking about cars. And I was a custom guy to start with. And so that went on, and that led to models and then building model cars. And then somewhere in high school, everybody always had an older brother. And the older brothers always had the cars. So that's how I also got into the car thing. And more specifically, early hot rods was through my buddy's older brothers. But then that always led to slot cars. And I had the custom wooden box, and inside you had the slot car chassis, 2 or 3 of those, and then 4 or 5 bodies, and then all the wheel and tire and gear combinations. And as long as I live, I'll never forget my first one was the Manta Ray. If you remember, that was introduced at the 63 Grand National Roadster Show the same year Tex had built the XR6. And so both of those cars, and to a significant degree, Tex was influential in my life and would be so in a few years. And as far as the Manta Ray, Jeff, in meeting them, I was meeting heroes, people who worked on cars that I liked. And Jeffrey's pinstripe Kikuki car. And of course, that was used on the TV show 77 Sunset Strip. And when I saw that car on the TV show, you couple that with Route 66 and Corvettes. And there was my 2 loves in hot rods, Corvettes and early cars. So that's how all that got going. And then by the time I got to the end of high school, I was drag racing because my neighbor, who had the perfect name, his name was Rod Warfield. We drag raced the Corvette between he and one of my high school buddies. And we were fortunate enough to win the AHRA Winter Nationals 3 years running.
Oh, wow.
And so we ran the C Modified Sports class, and that's how I got to meet a lot of drag racers that were coming up. And because I lived in Garden Grove, because that's where Hayden Prophet was housed, and there was a street, it was called Acacia, and it was a cul-de-sac. It was a little industrial cul-de-sac. And it had all kinds of hot rod shops there, body shops and a bowling shirt company that made bowling shirts that lettered. So that's where everyone got their drag race shirts, their bowling shirts, And then it went on in Hayden's shop and whatnot. Well, when the East Coast guys would come out to the West, remember that was back in the days, the 60s were very heavy match racing. And so we would get Jungle Jim. We would get Chrisman, and we would get Eddie Sharpman. and I think we're getting our bleed back a little there. But they would come to the West Coast, and they needed a place to stay. So they'd stay at Hayden's shop. That's where they would put their gear up. Well, how I got to know all of those guys, and this is what got me deeper into racing and then the magazines and whatnot. Hayden used to rent me out. He said, Brennan, you can use him as your gopher. He'll do whatever you need. And he knows his way around the Bakersfield track at the time, and then, Lions drag strip and all of that. He says, all you have to do is pay his entry, pit pass, and pay for his meals. Well, they thought, well, hell, that's a steal. Back in the days when hamburgers were 25 to 35 cents a piece. And I'll never forget one time when Eddie Shartman came back and said to Hayden, if I'd have known how much that son of a bitch could eat, I'd have never taken him. And so that always became the gag from that time on. But
so my dad used to tell me to eat up because fat kids were harder to steal. That's what my dad has told me. So I want to go back a little bit. What year was that Corvette that you guys were racing and winning with?
Well, it was a 57 Corvette, and it was 64, 5, and 6 that we won the Nationals. And we had one of the first Bill Thomas dual air meter fuel injection systems. Because remember, I was going to high school.
What the intake was and what it was running.
Yeah, it was a small block, 327. But I was working after schools a couple of nights a week at Bill Thomas Race Cars. Now, remember, Bill Thomas Race Cars is where the first funny cars for Dickie Harrell and some of the others came out of. And that was, that's how I made my... They didn't actually pay me in money. These were in the days when strange and wonderful things. But he paid me in credits. And I just purchased in 67 my first Chevy 2. It was a Nova SS, 327, 4-speed, bucket seats, positive traction, all that good stuff. And so I was also rebuilding Corvette fuel injection units. This is back in the days of mechanical fuel injection. And that's how I made extra money. Guys with early Corvettes and 63 Corvettes, 64 Corvettes, the big box and the intermediate box injectors, I got pretty good at them, and I could rebuild them and make money.
How old were you at this time?
Well, I graduated when I was 18, so this was probably somewhere between the ages of 16 and 18. I was doing all this. So I was making...
So you bought that Nova in high school?
Yeah. Well,
was that your very first car? You didn't have like a beater before that or nothing?
Oh, sure. My parents... Well, I had a 49 Studebaker Champion. Now, those cars were famous because you weren't sure which direction it was going when you got in. Okay. The Studebaker Champion.
I love Studebakers and stuff. Was a Studebaker considered a cool car then? Or were you like the nerdy kid in the high school parking lot driving the Studebaker?
The only reason I wasn't the nerdy one is because every other idiot had something. A shoebox Ford was not considered cool yet. And neither was the 1950 Plymouth, the little two-door coupe. And that's what was in the parking lot.
So your first job was working at race car shops.
Yeah, but I didn't make any money. I was just gathering credits to buy parts for
we always like to hear people's stories of trying to get some embarrassing stuff. And I'd say the widest variety is they worked at a grocery store, either a cashier, or box boy, or warehouse guy. And then they got the magazines because they're working at the grocery store. So that we always like to hear the early stuff. We try to find some embarrassing stuff. So.
Well, the car magazine I got more and more inundated by because the guys from the magazines, I know you probably know the name Eric Rickman, but there was Pat Brolier, who was another very well-known photographer back in that era for all of the Peterson books. Well, they were always coming to Hayden's shop or one of the other shops because they were going to shoot whatever he had. And remember, he evolved into the funny car deal as well. So whether it was Bill Thomas...
Back then when the funny cars came out, I listened to a bunch of other podcasts, and I listened to a drag race podcast, and I forget.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was a Roland Leong podcast. It was somebody from that era. And they're like, you don't understand that funny cars weren't that accepted back in the day. And that's why they called them funny cars. They thought they were a circus sideshow and thought they would never last. And I love funny cars still to this day. And as a teenager and the little kid growing up in the 70s, I mean, Don Perdome, the Army car, that was it. So I've always been a funny car fan, but they weren't really widely accepted back then, were they?
No. And remember, the first funny cars weren't really funny cars. They were altered wheelbase dragsters, but they were full body. And they created a problem for the NHRA because there really wasn't a neat class for them. So the original funny cars or altered wheelbase, they ran against dragsters. Well, you couldn't beat them. But I'll never forget at Lions one night when Crispin, he was racing a dragster and it was for the final round and he knew he was going to get beat, but he was talking to one of the photographers. It wasn't for Hot Rod, but it was one of the other 9,000 books that were out at the time. He said, here's what's going to happen. I've got opposite tower lanes. That was the spectator side of Lions. He says, I am going to jump that light by a big margin. What you're going to have is a hole shot with me pulling a big wheelie way ahead of a dragster. Get it. The guy got it, and it became the cover. And with that came the term funny car. And that is what just got everyone crazy about him. And then the NHRA figured out, okay, we got to make a class and all that. But the original funny cars, the guys wanted weight transfer, so they pushed that axle up in the back, a foot, maybe brought the front end forward a few inches. And those were the first ones. And I remember taking Dickie Harrell's car he obviously lived back east, but his Nova stayed out here. The first Nova stayed out here at Bill Thomas. And I was always working on that, cleaning it, getting it ready, doing something, or driving the truck. Does the name Jess Tyree ring a bell?
Not really.
Jess Tyree was the man with Pontiacs. He could make Pontiacs run, and he built Tyree headers and all that stuff. And if you had
I grew up not far in Midwest Illinois. We knew Dickie Harrell was around there. And, of course, Arnie the Farmer was close to us. We'd always show up in Cordova. Yeah,
Beswick. He'd come out to the West Coast, stay at Hayden's. Well, Jess Tyree was down the street, maybe a mile from Bill Thomas. Well, Jess and Bill used to go drinking all the time. And they were never sober enough to get their stuff home. So I'd end up driving them home. And they'd have to go back to the shop and then get my car, and then I'd go home. Stuff like that just went on. And then when I got out of high school, my college years were filled with drag racing, off-road racing, and working at Disneyland.
Before we get into that, I want to stop. I always say I want to build a time machine out of a DeLorean and go back in time. There's a few times I'd love to go back to. I'd love to go buy a brand new 55 Chevy off the lot, off the assembly line, brand new one of them. I'm sure there's some more other times and, back and maybe see the Beatles or something like that. But if I could go back to that Lions drag racing era and at least attend an event at something like that, I'm a huge drag racing nerd. It would just be incredible. And now you could, it'd take a whole, you could, but it would take a whole lot of money to pay me to live in Southern California. I go there for a week at the Roadster Show. I've had enough. I want to come back to Tennessee. But if I could go back in that heyday of the drag racing stuff, the American Hot Rod Foundation, I don't know if you listen to David Steele's podcast, they don't do a lot of them anymore. And there's all those guys that they've talked to about, and some of these guys sadly aren't here with us anymore, about the Southern California, the flathead guys, the funny because they interviewed Roland Leong before he passed. And that era of drag racing is just, to me, that's the golden era of everything.
Oh, there's no question about it, because you could not go to school on Monday and not talk about what happened at Lions. And even the guys who didn't drag race, they'd listen to you because they were such great stories. And you talk about going back and buying a 55 Chevy new off the lot. Well, I remember going with my parents in 1956 to Felix Chevrolet, which is still there. And the big Felix the Cat sign is still there. It's across the street from USC. And I remember sitting in the back of a 56 Chevy that they drove off the lot. We went home in. And that was my first car. That was a real car, a nice car, compared to what the 49 Studebaker Champion was.
Yeah. So what model was the 56? I grew up, my first car was a 55. My dad has a handful of Tri-5 still, so I'm a Tri-5 nut.
It was the Del Rey, which was the stripped down post, plain Jane.
It had the best looking interior in it.
It did. It had black and white interior, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And of course, that was the day when you still had metal dashboards, and I used to polish and shine the living bejesus out of that thing. And, so that was my favorite car at the time, and that's the car that I sold for $200. So I had enough money for a down payment for my 67 Chevy Nova, which came in. I bought it through Disneyland when I was working there on the employee fleet program. So you got a little discount and all that. And I was able to buy
What year
it.
did you start at Disney?
I started in Disneyland the year I turned 18. So that would have been 66-ish. Yeah. Somewhere around April of 66.
So if people aren't paying attention, obviously you were a born and raised Southern California guy forever.
I was born in the Bronx, in New
Okay.
York.
We didn't get to that part. Yeah.
Well,
We didn't go back that far.
Yeah.
yeah, I was asthmatic, and I was not doing well. And the doctor said, you got to get this kid out of the kind of weather that New York had and get him to a dry climate. Go to Phoenix. So my parents packed my little butt up, and we went to Phoenix. And we lasted about a week there. They didn't like it. But we had relatives in Southern California. So we go to Southern California. There's a little town called Montebello, which is basically the outskirts of L.A. now. And
So how old were you when you had to move out there?
I was probably 3-ish,
Okay.
4-ish, so I was young.
His parents obviously loved him more than our parents, because if either one of us had a health problem, they wanted to move halfway across the country, our parents just would have gave us away, right? Left us at the fire station or something like that. Yeah.
Someday I got to tell you the story about Neil East, who was an LA Roadster member forever and was a longtime hot rodder, one of the early freelancers. He had his Roadster on the cover of Rod and Custom, the first big issue.
That's the red one that Bruce Meyer just donated to the Peterson in the last year, right?
Okay, you got it.
So real quick on the Neil East car, I always get a laugh out of it, because some of these hardcore traditional hot rod guys, you can't do this, you can't shave the door hinges off. The Neil East car had shaved door handles or door hinges on it, didn't it?
Yes, it did. And you do know that Neil owned the Doane Spencer car, the Roadster, that everyone, the first, not first, but the early winner of the Grand National Roadster Show, and a very famous hot rod that's in the museum now. He owned it longer than anybody.
Okay.
And he and I drove that car across country to the Street Rod Nationals on a couple of occasions. So that was fun. But anyway, Neil, the reason I got to tell you the Neil story, because his parents, Neil went to UCLA and he went to school at night, and in daytime he worked for the Howard Hughes aircraft company and at the Santa Monica airport, and he was a guard gate. Okay, now it was a back gate. No one ever went in or out, so he worked the night shift, and that's how he studied his homework and did all of that. In the 2 years he was there, no one ever went in or out of the gate he was guarding. But the story is, during that period of time, his parents moved, and he thought he'd surprise them at Thanksgiving by going back home. He goes back home, knocks on the door, and has no clue who these people are, answering the door, and says, I live here. And they go, no, you don't. And now everyone's starting to, wait a minute, we just bought this house from the East family, and they moved somewhere. And Neil goes, well, those are my parents, but they didn't tell me they moved. I love that story, so I always have to tell it.
We have something similar here. When we bought this house in Tennessee,
Yeah.
This lady obviously did not tell all of her kids that she moved out. And it was 6 months after us being in here that one day, we live up in the middle of nowhere. All of a sudden, there's some young 20-year-old girl in the house with Carrie. It's like, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? It's like, we live here now. Where'd my mom go? It's like, well, I guess you're not very tight with your mom, are you?
I was vacuuming. It was
You were vacuuming. Okay.
scary.
Yeah.
Well, those really were good times. They were fun. But Neil clearly survived that, and he's fine. He wasn't scarred too much. And we just grew up and did what we had to do, and we loved our cars. Now, I think in the 60s and 70s, it started coming back. Hot rodders would drive what they built. And even if they weren't their daily car, they still drove them a lot. Nowadays, that doesn't happen for any number of reasons. But I really did enjoy those days. And they were a lot of fun, and I learned a lot. And, I got to grow up, and I knew all of the original guys from Hot Rod Magazine. I used to have lunch with Wally Parks, and I knew Eric Rickman, and on and on and on down the line. And so the stories I had from the early days were from the guys writing the stories. So it
So
was fun.
you got into that circle of guys because you were hanging around all the racers, and it was all Southern California, and you seen everybody at the racetracks and stuff like that.
Yeah, because the racers, who were the ones with the cars that everyone wanted to see, they were sugar, and they drew all of the magazine guys to them, and I'm just standing there. Well, I'm no one, but I'm introducing myself and saying hi, and I'm harmless, and they're all introducing themselves. And now I kind of go through college, and my major was journalism. And when I get out of college,
When in your part during this race car stuff and everything, did you think, oh, now I want to be a journalist before you went to college? What flipped that switch?
oh, my mother is a twin, so her sister was married to my uncle Warren Gers, who at the time was the vice president for Lever Brothers, and he was in charge of the marketing department in New York. And he said, when you graduate,
We don't know what Lieber Brothers is.
oh, Lever, L-E-V, detergents, in fact, still a
Oh,
number,
okay. Okay.
household detergents and dish soaps and body soaps and on and on and on. So it was a big deal company. And unfortunately, unbeknownst to me, my mother and her twin decided that I was clearly going down the wrong path, playing with cars and doing all of that. So my butt was going to get shipped out of town when I
Our
graduated.
family still thinks that about us.
Well, God rest my parents' souls. They thought that pretty much right up until the end. They were going to ship my butt out back to New York, and I was going to get a proper job in marketing with Lever Brothers and learn the ropes and become corporate advertising. Well, now, this is the unfortunate part. Uncle Warren died halfway through my senior year in college, so now I'm getting ready to graduate, and I'm spinning my wheels. I don't know what I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as they say, the serendipitous, it happens. Tex Smith comes to Cal State Fullerton, says, hey, do you have any journalism majors that have a car background? And they go, yes, we have one. So by default, I get the interview. And I walk in and I meet Tex, and I'm introduced, and I go, I know you. You're Tex Smith. And you built the XR6, and you write for Hot Rod Magazine. And in 10 minutes, I had interviewed him. And he says, this is fantastic. We're around the corner from Cal State Fullerton. We're starting a publishing company with a man by the name of Tom McMullen, who at that time had a company called AEE Choppers, AEE Choppers. So and if you remember, that was at the period when Easy Rider had made the big splash in the movies. And
about what year was this?
That would have been 1970, 71-ish, right in there. And so that all happened. And I said, well, I know Tom McMullen. He's got a good-looking 32 Roadster with the flames, and he won the Winter Nationals and did all this stuff. And then
didn't he have another company, like an electrical company or something? Or am I confusing it with
No. You're talking about AEE Choppers was actually an acronym for Automotive Electrical Engineering.
Oh, okay.
That was Tom's only business license he had. So when he started the motorcycle company, he just used that business license, but didn't use the automotive electrical part. He just used it as an acronym. And
so I never obviously got to meet Tom McMullen.
Yeah.
In the magazines, he just looked like I was born in 71. Sorry. He just looked like the coolest 70s dude ever in the magazines. I remember there was a picture of him. He had an airplane that he landed someplace with his motorcycle stuff logo on the side. And he was all dressed up in like bell bottoms and like platform shoes. And whoever female was with him was in these little hot pants and like go-go boots. And it was like, that is the coolest picture I think I've ever seen.
Okay, Jim Clark shot the photo, and I was standing next to Jim. That was back in the AEE Chopper days, and he had just started the magazine company. Now, the first magazine was called Hot Bike. The second one, the second one was then Street Rodder, and that's really why I was brought in. But for the first year, I worked on motorcycle magazines. But Jim Clark shot that photo. It was painted by Molly, and Molly was just coming upon the scene as the painter you wanted for your funny car, because he did these wild asymmetrical paint designs.
So he was kind of like in that vein of Circus Paint and all those type of guys, right?
Yep. But it was cool because so many of his wilder paint schemes were based on crazy colors and asymmetrical design. So you had to walk around the whole car because you wouldn't see everything until you did. And he had Tom paint his Cessna, and I think it was a Cessna. In those days, it might have been a 210. He passed away in a 310 Q, but the 210 might have been the early one. And that car, that airplane, that photo was taken at the Bonneville Salt Flats. He flew up there during race week and landed on the salt. And he was sponsoring at the time, or AW Choppers was sponsoring a Worldland Speed Record bike that Mel DeSharoon and another fellow were campaigning for. So that's how we ended up there doing all of that.
So he built his famous 32 Roadster before he had Street Rodder magazine?
Long. In fact, he sold it. Technically, the car was sold even before he started the magazine company. He got the Roadster, and there's been many stories written about it and all that, but it was a greenish, very drab colored car. And then he painted it black, and then it went through a litany of motors. The way it sits now with the blown small block is its most famous iteration, and that was the one that appeared on the cover of Hot Rod and Popular Hot Rodding and a number of other magazines, and at least a half dozen different record album covers, including a Japanese record album cover and some others. So he sold it.
Clarify again. You started at his company working for the Chopper magazine.
Yep.
So you were there from issue 1 of Street Rodder. And what year and month was the first issue of Street Rodder? Trying to see if I have that in my collection.
You look up either May or April of 71.
Okay.
So
I have a pile here of my stuff, and I'm kind of a collector nerd. But I have currently some Street Rodder in the binders.
Yeah.
These are early 80s that I currently have in the house. So
that's what you're looking for. I mean, gosh, it seems so natural to me. My entire life has been spent with a magazine of some sort. Okay. And most of the time, well, I suppose technically most of it was spent with Street Rodder between the first and second coming. And then I was with Popular Hot Rodding for a couple of years, and those were great days. And I was there with the advent of Super Chevy, and just on and on and on. And then the off-road craze hit, and I got sucked up into that. So
you're moving a little fast for me. One, I want to say one of the first issues of Street Rodder I remember. My uncle always got them. My dad got them every once in a while. He was more of the classic Chevy International. He got Super Chevy and Popular Hot Roddings because of Project X is our favorite project car, which I've got to drive twice. And I remember my first issue that that really tripped a trigger of Street Rodder would have been probably 78 or 9. So I was 7 or 8 years old. It was the Roadster Show issue. It was a red 32 that won the AMBR. Was it Phil Cool? I used to think it Mick Cool, but it's Phil Cool or something like that, right?
Yeah.
That's like the magazine that I remember. It's like, oh man, this is the cool. I want to do this for the rest of my life. As a little kid like that, that was like, this is awesome. I remember it had slicks and it sat up like a gasser, but it won the AMBR.
Well, my first Grand National Roadster show that I ever went to was actually up in the Bay Area when it was still there at the old Cow Palace. And
I went it was in San Mateo 2 years in the late 90s, I think.
Yeah, that would have been around the 49th version of
those are the first 2 that I flew out for. It was still in Northern California when I went first few times. So.
Yeah, it went from the Bay Area to San Mateo, but just for a couple of years. And little fact, that was the year that Alloway won with the guy with the black paint. The guy
I've never heard of her.
Well, you'll remember Bobby because he dropped trow at the Triple Crown of Rodding, and so that's how we now remember him. Forget all of the cars he's ever built. He won the 49th Grand National Roadster Show, which was which was San Mateo, with George Lange's Red Roadster, which was the last Boyd Coddington, that car of that period before they then, it all went off. Into the
And what
sunset.
year again was that one?
See, I got to look that up because I'm not sure, but it's the 49th Grand National Roadster.
It was late 90s, right? Or early 2000s. Yeah.
No, late 90s. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I kind of forgot that I remember him winning that, but I kind of forgot that was George's car. Man, he's been building cars for George for a long time, man.
Yeah. And George still has that car. And
Yeah.
now, if you want a little side story to that car, we put it on the cover of Street Rodder, and I put it on the cover, and it actually came out just before the show. And
Which, Alloway fans, it was actually red. It was not black.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. And on the cover, the main cover line was, "Is this America's most beautiful roadster?" Well, that created a controversy because everyone goes into the show and they're all reading Street Rodder and says, they're saying this is the car that wins. And then, of course, he wins. And the show promoter, the Sloniker days, I guess, it'd be the end of that. They just chewed on Bobby. They said, if this car wasn't head and shoulders above everything else, you'd have never won. And Bobby to this day still gives me grief about that. And I said, hey, I was just asking, is this the most beautiful roadster? Everyone took it wrong.
It was a question, not a statement.
So we had fun with that. But
so let's go back a little bit. When did Super Chevy and Popular Hot Rodding start? Do you remember roughly what years those started?
Well, they would have been.
Hot Rodding was 60s, right? Was Super Chevy that didn't start in the late 60s or late 60s?
It would have been very late 60s or 70s. I mean, it was late. PHR came about because a couple of guys left Peterson and they were going to start their own thing, Werner and Bain. And
was that Argus then? Was they called Argus Publications?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And it was Popular Hot Rodding because obviously the name Hot Rod was taken and all of that. Mm-hmm. And then it was Tex who, as a freelancer, put together for them. Do you remember a book they did, 1001 Custom and Rod Ideas?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, that was a takeoff on Rod and Custom's name.
Okay.
They twisted it around. And so they did that book for a few years. And I don't know if you remember Tom Center, but Tom Center was a famous journalist of the time who was a big flathead lover, loved his Ardens, was building a Whirlland speed record car, whatnot, that was Arden-powered flathead before his death. And anyway, so, I worked with him for a while, and Steve Reyes, who to this day I still think is the greatest drag race photographer of all time.
I've luckily got to, last handful, it's been a few years, but Brian Loans got me to do some sportsman race announcing at some of the big events. Yeah. And I showed up, day one. It's a day longer, like Gainesville and U.S. Nationals and stuff. And I got to announce sportsman classes at the Gator Nationals in Florida. And day two, he came up to take a break, and I got to hang out with Steve for like an hour in there, just hearing stories. And we had a rain delay, so he was hiding from the rain. So it wasn't like we were working in between, and we just put on music. And he had his book. He was selling prints and stuff like that. And I always remember his name because all the fire pictures was always usually shot by him, the fire burnouts.
Okay, here comes the story. Steve was so well respected, he knew all the drag racers. And he would ask them, how much nitro? Remember, this was in the days when you could get away with 98% nitro. He was saying, how much nitro are you running? And the guys would tell him how much they'd run in warm-ups and the first rounds, and if they were going to tip the can in the final round. And he knew some guys knew what they were doing, and some guys almost knew what they were doing. And the almost guys, he knew when they would tip the can, they were blowing up in the lights. So he'd pack up and he'd go down to the end of the track. It was about 300 feet before the end, the beginning of the lights, not really the finish line, but at the start of the timing lights. And he'd set up, and he knew they were going to blow up. And they'd come in and they'd blow up, and he'd get all those photos. And that's, to be honest, that made PHR, because they always had these pictorials that were nothing but his photos.
Yeah.
And
it's kind of like the early days of the video that you could order from Diamond P. And they walked away 3,
Yeah. But so those were the fun things. And as you know, Steve is a big guy. But when I knew Steve, you have to remember he was in his early 30s or late 20s. So he was a mountain of a guy, and he was the smallest one in the family. He had three brothers that just towered over him, and his dad his dad had to have been 6 feet wide, and he wasn't fat. He was just a block. And his mom was a big woman, and I came by the house a couple of times. I just felt like the cheese in a rat trap. I mean, there was no room for me in this. I did not sit down to eat with them because this was going to be a hungry meal. But I loved him. I thoroughly enjoyed traveling across the country with him, going to Canada, doing all of that stuff. It was fun. It was a lot of fun.
So through there, when you're at McMullen, it was called then. What other
TRN?
Okay.
In the beginning, it was McMullen. It was Tom and Rose McMullen, and then after the divorce, it became McMullen.
Okay.
And then later on, Ken Yee and McMullen Yee Publishing and all of that.
Yeah. And then, so you were at Street Rodder, and were you helping out on some of the other magazines and titles when they started springing up? Everybody kind of jumped in and helped everyone.
Yeah. The way it's kind of the way we've patterned our books now. You didn't have staffs. There was one guy in charge of each book, and we staggered the deadlines. So if Hot Bike deadline was this coming Monday, a week or 10 days before, Steve Stillwell, myself would jump on with Dane Gingerelli and Paul, and whatever was needed, we would get it done, and then get Hot Bike out the door, and then everyone would jump on. Okay, now we got to jump on Hot Bike, and that would have been Stillwell. And
so Stillwell, was he out early on, early back then? Because I got to know him as a truck guy because what he did with Truckin' Magazine. That's when I kind of remember that his name really stuck out to me.
Yeah, Steve came from back east, and he was a reader of AEE Choppers magazine. He was an early subscriber, and he loved the book. And when Tex was starting the company up for Tom, I was actually the first editorial employee hired. And then Steve, a month later, was hired. He came from back east, and I forgot where he grew up, but he came out west with his wife and got a job working on the magazine because he knew about choppers and knew the book and all that. So Steve and I worked together and remained lifelong friends until his passing. I mean, do
you have any weird stories? I'm kind of jump around here on how somebody got hired. Like, we're BMX people, so we just got to go help. I got to MC and do the red carpet at the National BMX Hall of Fame induction this weekend in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And the guys, most of the staff got inducted that did freestyle in BMX magazine. Yeah. And the Lou guy that brought he did the music articles, and then they started putting skateboard stuff and more lifestyle stuff. And no offense, but I say many times it's hard to hold a candle to what BMX Action and freestyling did for that whole industry, and how the guy wrote the articles to appeal to the kids and blown up and make all these guys superstars that are now getting inducted in the Hall of Fame. It's just, if you've never grabbed one of those magazines from the 80s, I highly recommend it. And this Lou guy, he lived in Kalamazoo, Michigan. He told the story during his induction, and he goes, I wasn't a writer, but one day I loved that magazine. I just got a wild hair up my ass and went and bought stationery. He goes, I wrote a letter to the editor of the magazine every day for 3 months.
Until my stationery ran out.
And then finally I get a response back because, you couldn't email stuff. He didn't really, it wasn't cell phones, and didn't really give, this is my mom and dad's number. He was like 17 or 18 years old, wasn't he? Yeah. And so they write a little letter, and it's like, the editor of this freestyle magazine that was really new because it sprung from the BMX Action, more racing magazine. And he goes, it pretty much read, hey, Lou, this is Andy, the editor of the magazine. You seem like a really weird kid, but I like your style. Well, we want to fly you out to California for an interview. And he went out there and he got a job. And now this dude, from starting there, it's not his company, but he's way high up in a marketing firm that handles, like, I know they handle McDonald's and Nike and I mean, he's just like, he is blown up. And, the other guy is part of one of the biggest skateboard companies in the world. I mean, they just really evolved. And
there is no question. And that was the one thing that Tex taught me. He says, I don't care how well you were trained to be a writer. He says, that's nice. You know where a period goes and a comma and you can capitalize. But he says, until you've scraped your knuckles across the back of a radiator, changing a water pump in the middle of Oklahoma, broken down on the side of the road, and you have to find the nearest junkyard and figure out how to solve these problems, he says the readers will know you're not the real deal. And
that's what they kind of talked about, these BMX kids. We wanted somebody with style and something cool and their finger on the heartbeat. Then they hired a guy to proofread it and kind of change it, but not change their words. Could you imagine a proofreader trying to correct the language of Gray Baskerville?
No. She would have taken the Baskerville out of Baskerville. And that's right. The people early on in the magazine business understood we are not selling literary work here. We are appealing to kids and their passion. So if you have a nickname of Fats Callahan, that's your byline. That's what people are going to identify with. And when they meet you, they're going to walk up to you like they've known you for 100 years and start with, hi, Fats, my name is, and you're going to treat them like you've known them forever. And this is the one and only time you'll see them in your life. I wrote an editorial once years ago at Street Rodder, and it got one of the best responses I've ever had. And I mean, it was significant. I talked about all the people that I had met once. I've only met them once. I've never seen them again. But they came up to me at an event because I read Street Rodder, and the first thing I read your editorial, and I get a kick out of it. And I go, well, what's your car? Then we start about their car. Then that leads into their family life. And then, it goes the whole gamut. And then I've never seen those people again. And yet that's very cool.
But you probably made their year. Man, the guy from the magazine took time to talk to me.
I hope so. But
the first time I ever talked to Gray Baskerville, he cussed me out.
Oh, well then, if you want that story, the first time I ever met Little John Butera.
See, Little John was always nice to me. Fat Jack was nice to me when I met him, and Boyd was always nice to me. That doesn't normally happen, that those three are nice to people. We were getting shot at a hot rod show, early 90s. We weren't even running our shop yet. So over 30 years ago, Cole Quinnell was shooting the car.
Oh, sure.
Which actually never made hot rod. And we were new. We're not even married yet. And it was like, oh, my God. And I knew that's Gray Baskerville. Hey, where are they doing the photo shoots?
Yeah.
And he looked at me. What? I go, well, Cole's supposed to shoot my car. How in the F am I supposed to know where that guy, this is where I'm shooting. Get the hell out of here. And I'm like, my meeting with Gray the first time left me with my tail between my legs. And it was Indianapolis. Yeah.
Boyd and I worked at Disneyland at the same time. Now, Boyd was in the part of the maintenance department that you needed a skill. He could work machinery. I, on the other hand, pushed a broom around. So that
was just ask if you were a janitor.
I have followed more horses, and in the early days, elephants, than I cared. But when I met Boyd in the hot rod world, I just walked up to him and I said, "Hey, Boyd, how's it going?" And we started talking about Disneyland, and everyone just stopped dead in their tracks. They had, "What are you guys talking about?" "Oh, we've known each other for years."
Can you stop just for a second?
Yeah.
Is our picture away? My sound's still good, but we're okay then?
You're fine.
Okay.
You still look like Tim Stranger to me. So
yeah, that's right. It's French. Nobody goes with that. So, yeah.
So Boyd and I always had that. And then as far as Fat Jack just tolerated me. That's the best I can put it. But now, his son is great, and he and I get along great, and so that all works out really well.
We have him going to be on the podcast. He's been on Chris Coddington's quite a few times, and we're going to get Johnny on here. Johnny recently sold me some old Fat Jack ball milled anodized stuff for my OBS truck. Yeah, so Johnny's really cool. He said, "Yeah, just call me whenever." So I'm going to have Johnny on here and tell some stories. So
it was nice that Fat Jack's truck. I realize it's been redone and all that, but it won at the National Truck Show, the Grand National Truck Show this past weekend, and won.
Oh, did it?
World's Most Beautiful Truck. So it did real well. It won the big award. So they're real happy about that.
I thought the Black Flame truck won that award. No,
it was Fat Jack's truck. And
yeah. No, I was thinking the late 40s that they still own with the purple stuff. Yeah, the Classic Car Studio guys, that was started by Fat Jack. Yep.
Many moons ago.
Yeah.
And then Little John, the only thing I had just a teeny bit going for me is I was a magazine guy that knew gray, and he loved gray. And so he would tolerate me for about this much. And it took years, but by the time Little John passed away, he and I were very close and very good friends. And there was a lot of good stories there. But
I have sitting right over here, I have 2 billet rocking chairs that Little John was commissioned to build for Mike Guidry.
I know that.
And I have one of the lamps from 1988 that Little John built for his friends. I have one of those in my living room.
That you have some of the coolest stuff that will ever come across to any hot.
And I have one of those little cars that he would build.
Yep.
Of course, I got it from a friend's estate that his family knew how much it meant to me, and they made sure that I got when my buddy passed away that collected all this.
Good.
And I've got all the Boyd billet yo-yos in the top and all that crazy stuff.
Well, the Bobby, that Alloway kid, he used to get all kinds of neat stuff from Boyd and Little John. I used to go to Little John's, and I'd go out to the back behind when it was at his house, behind the garage, and he had a big 50-gallon drum, 55-gallon drum that had aluminum that was going to be recycled because the parts were bad or something. And I would go in there and I'd see a windshield post or a starting of a steering wheel or something, and I'd take it out, and he'd see me walking out with it. He'd throw whatever tool he had in his hand at me. He goes, "What are you doing with that?" I said, "Well, Little John, you're going to get rid of it, and it's cool, and I'd like to keep it." And he'd come up and he'd take it away from me, and he'd go, "God damn it, if I wanted you to have it, I'd give it to you. This is trash." And he'd throw it back in. 30 days, 60 days goes by. Here's a cool windshield post. Here's a cool steering wheel. This is what you're supposed to have. He says, "I don't want people looking at that old shit and thinking that's what I did."
Yeah.
And I just went, okay, now I knew I made it, So that was cool. But fun stuff.
Okay, so where were we? We got a little sidetracked. Where were we in your timeline at this? So,
well, we were coming out of college, and I was drag racing, and it was with the Corvette, and so therefore I was getting my start in the magazine business. And so that would have been 71-ish, 2-ish, and did that. And the next step was Ray Brock had left Hot Rod Magazine. He'd been the vice president there and, tech editor at Hot Rod for many, many years and was quite famous at that. And Tex had left, McMullen Publishing and all that because he just couldn't handle the let's call it the disenfranchisement between Rose and Tom. It was a tough place to work, so all of the guys eventually left.
So I've heard stories back in that days. I don't know if it was the McMullen or if it was like the Peterson era back. They said that it's pretty much, if you want to know how, I think it was the Peterson era of stuff. When like John Diana was there, they said if you watch that advertising TV show called Mad Men, they said it was kind of along that lines. Like everybody's office had a bar in it, and allegedly they didn't care if the secretary could actually type, long as she was good looking and could make a good drink for them and stuff like that.
There, as there is with every story, there is some truth to all of them. Okay? So what you say, there is some truth. Now, as stories grow, they tend to become legend, and legends tend to get bigger and bigger over time. But Peterson did have the top floor there at the building, and it was a spectacular office that did have all the accoutrements that you would want to ever have a party. And of course, Diana was big at going out to 11 o'clock lunches that didn't end until 11 p.m. and, the nearest big name restaurant and all of that. And yeah, there was a lot of Detroit advertisers who came west, and yeah, it got pretty crazy. The guys who actually wrote the pages, you could find them at McDonald's. And that's just the way it was. The car guys are car guys.
Eating takeout at their desk.
Yeah. Amen. And that was always that way. Yeah. It was fun. It was a great time to learn about a business that, although I never thought I would see the end of it, did come to an end in roughly 2000 when Discovery Channel's put the end to 19 of the 21 books.
Before we get into that, so we talked about the 70s and the 80s and into the 90s a little bit. What do you think the best era? And you can say now that you're there's less people involved at your company, so it's easier to steer the ship the direction you want it to go, that's just me looking on the outside. You don't have as many corporate suits looking down on you, probably. Guys that are getting paychecks and not really, like you say, the real workers eating takeout at their desks and stuff. But what do you think was the best era of being in the magazine business when sales were good and huge advertising dollar? And like you say, it's like, if you go to an event, you're not staying at Motel 6. You might be staying at the Hyatt or the Sheraton, Four Seasons or whatever. What era because you've worked through all the automotive stuff. I mean, it's not an old joke or nothing like that, but you've worked at all these generations of all the stuff and building Street Rodder from what it was. And it's still an iconic label. And I hate that they killed it. Yeah. But when was your favorite time or the biggest time that you think?
That's a tough one because there was so much good to be offered at all the times. In the early days, it seemed to me, and when I say early, let's call it the 60s and 70s, it was more hands-on. And there was less someone overlooking your shoulder. But there was less money, and there was a lot more sharing rooms and a lot more, we don't need to eat lunch.
But then when you look back at it, you could go to Lions and cover an event and meet those guys. And
And now the one thing that has never changed, so no matter how you did it, you had to put a book together once every 30 days. That was a fact of life. And that has not changed. I do know that my days on Street Rodder from the mid to late 90s through 2006 financially were probably the best. Now that meant they brought in the most money. And so what that did is that cut us a little bit of slack. We actually had a staff. I mean, we had 4 guys, 5 guys, and they all knew what they were doing and they were all fun to work with. But
how big back then was probably that era with all the advertisers was your thickest Street Rodder? I listened to a truck podcast. I think it was Travis Nowak.
Yeah.
And he had one on behind his desk. And he goes, at one time, this is like Truckin' Magazine was like 315 pages. It was half mail order ads or stuff, but it was 300 and some pages long. What was the thickest Street Rodder that you ever put out?
I can tell you Truckin' was much bigger than that. In Truckin's heyday, they went 360. And then the biggest Street Rodder ever was 372.
Wow. And, you know what was that 90s?
No, that would have been, I'm going to get shot for this for not remembering it, but it would have been the late 90s. We're talking somewhere between 98 and 2000.
Okay.
And what corporate realized was we can charge, we had to control the size of the book because it had got so expensive that literally we lost our butts on every subscription that we sold. I mean,
the shipping was more because it was heavier too then, right?
Right. And here's the other thing. We not only lost our shipping permit, but because we got so heavy, we no longer could go on the discounted rate for a mail order subscription, that sort of thing. So now we were getting up to where just to mail a single issue of the magazine cost more than to print it, just the postage.
So these sitting that I have right here are early 83, 4, 5, and they're around 100, 120 some pages at that time.
Yeah, the Street Rodder's heyday for a length of time would have been 91 through 2006, where the book consistently was over 200 pages and probably somewhere between 220 something and 360. It would be somewhere in there. And that would have been, I would say, definitely 98, 99. It was right in that time frame. But so corporate was trying to figure out, what are we going to do? We're making more money, but we're losing money here. It's costing us more money. So someone just said, we can fix that. We're just going to jack the ad rates up and drive advertisers out of the book and only keep the ones who can really afford to pay the fare. And when they started doing that, the book started coming down to where it got to about 272 pages, and that was the sweet spot. And they wanted to keep it.
You weren't really, hey, we need to cut. You did it in a way that you weren't firing your advertisers. You were letting them fire themselves about being an advertiser.
Yeah.
But then the sad part, you cut out some of the smaller street rod mom and pop companies too.
We cut out companies that made it through the tough times and are still around today. But Street Rodder was still so strong that no matter how much the advertisers bitched, the fact of the matter is they weren't going anywhere if they could afford it, because the book still pulled. And as it turned out, with less advertising, it actually pulled better. There was less distraction. There was less competition. And it was a crazy, crazy deal. So for the
I always forget that some people would just read Street Rodder, and some people were just rod and custom guys. Like Carrie used to work for a suspension company, and they used to advertise every month in both. This is early 2000s, late 90s.
Yeah.
And then she would answer calls and stuff. And then they started cutting, because this is probably the time when you started raising your rates, right?
Yeah.
They're like, okay, so we're going to alternate 1 month. Instead of being in both magazines, we're going to go Rod and Custom 1 month, Street Rodder. Well, the month that they were in Street Rodder, somebody who was a Rod and Custom reader would call and say, "Are you guys? I'm just calling to see if you're out of business. Why? Because I didn't see your ad this month.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be in next month." So we're alternating, and people, they were still paying attention. They weren't really a sales ad. They were just nosy. It's like, "You guys go out of business? You're not in the magazine this month." They didn't read. I always read every magazine. So
that's very, very true. And you had to understand that the Rod and Custom reader, the true Rod and Custom reader, was distinctly different than the true Street Rodder reader. They really were two different people. And I respected that, because I understood where the Rod and Custom guys were coming from, and I understood where the Street Rodder guys were coming from. And we used to have some great wars in the editorial offices, because there were guys who would speak down about Street Rodder or speak down about Rod and Custom. And I'm going, you idiots are missing the point here. And I said, first off, we're not doing this book because you like something. Let's remember that. Let's get that clear right away. We're doing this because the guy on the end of this circle that we've got here is putting money down on the table. When he completes the cycle by buying the magazine, you just got to keep your job. The advertiser now has a chance to sell product. Now they're happy. And I always likened our industry to a 5-spoke American wheel. And the reader was in the center. And then you had the magazines, and you had all the other components that make us up, were the spokes of this wheel. You take one of those spokes out, the wheel was no good. But you keep them all in there. You gave the reader what he wanted. And my philosophy always was, if you do a magazine, it better be entertaining, and it better be informative. And I don't mean showing regurgitated information that's really a glorified ad. I'm talking about trying to really pass along information. And if you do that, readers become entrenched, and now they become part of a family. And that was the one thing we noticed about Street Rodder. No matter what was happening, no matter what, even in the worst times, you remember about 2006, 7, and 8, when things really went upside down here in the country. Street Rodder's advertising went from, and I suppose I can talk about these numbers now, but it went from $600,000.
What are they going to do? Fire you?
They went from $600,000 an issue down to about $200,000 an issue. And the companies that were hanging on were smart, like Speedway Motors and Speedy Bill. I learned more about marketing from him than anyone. Because when I'd go back there, he'd always tell me, you're one of those California magazine guys who doesn't know squat. So I'd say, well, teach me. And we'd sit down and we'd go on for hours. But he understood, because he was around long enough, that there are ups and downs to everything. All right. And we were just going through another down. It was a good one, but it was just another one. And we would come out of it. And so as things went away, he started buying up some companies. And he kept his advertising. In fact, in some instances, he actually increased his advertising. And when things started coming back out about 2010, and then for the next few years, we could see things building up again, Speedway, man, they were locked in. They had it because the readers were part of a family, understood, they stuck with them through the thick and the thin times. And so they were loyal.
We learned a long time ago, early on, that what ads really cost, because we had a company we always dealt with. They did wheels for us. We usually did a one-off wheel, and we've been very lucky through our career. We've been in well over 350 some car magazines and ads and the Dave Bell cartoons and stuff. And this company says, if you ever get me a car with my wheels on it featured in Hot Rod magazine, I'll give you free wheels for your personal builds for the rest of our relation, around.
Yep.
And my God, we got a car featured in Hot Rod. The only car we've ever had a full feature in Hot Rod. David Freiberger was still coming up. He shot it and wrote the article. And that company, as long as that company was still owned by the same people, every year we built a car for SEMA or something for ourselves. We got to help with a one-off wheel, and they held their bargain, because they said at that time an ad in Hot Rod was like over $3,000 for I don't know how big the size was. And we got color 5 pages in Hot Rod, and they're like, man, that's golden. We got our wheels on 5 pages in Hot Rod magazine.
Hey, truer words were never spoken. You are absolutely correct. And to our own modest degree, Street Rodder was like that too. But where the problem really comes in, now Tim Foss is probably somewhere lurking around and listening to this, and he's going to hear all this, and I'm going to hear about it tomorrow. But
we're going to ask about all your coworkers.
Oh,
at least an embarrassing story from everybody. So
I'll give you good Rob stories and bad Rob stories. I'll load you up. There was a time where you would build a magazine project. If word got out that I wanted to build my Roadster, or I wanted to build the 48 Chevy pickup or whatever, I just got inundated from Chevrolet on down. Well, the problem was Tim would come in and say, this is our big advertiser. You got to use this, this, and this. And I go, well, this is all great product, but this doesn't look so good with this. And I don't particularly care for this. I like this better. And those would start World War III. It would get to the point to where, here's the way this is going down. I'm buying the goddamn part myself. and that's the way it's going to be. And if you think you can keep it out of the magazine, we're going at it. And now you have to understand, I adore Tim. I love him. He is, without question, the best advertising guy I've ever come across. And
when did he come in the magazine fold? How long since whenever have you worked with him?
He was way before me.
Wow.
He came in years before I did. And he came from.
He worked at the Chopper magazine too?
No.
Before?
Remember, I left. I left in the 70s and didn't come back until the 90s. So I had a 20-year gap where I did other books and other things. Tim,
where were you at in that gap while we're here?
Well, when I left Street Rodder, I went to Rod Action. Okay. And then after Rod Action, that book went away. And then I started doing things for, if you're familiar with Trailer Life magazine,
No.
Trailer Life magazine has the Good Sam Club, for RVers go all over. So I did work for them and whatnot. And then my wife and I, Kimmy and I, she had her business, which was involved in the trade show business for like the New York Toy Fair, the Chicago Toy Fair, Atlanta Toy Fair, things like that. The gift shows from those areas. So I helped her with that for years. But I was still doing freelance. And then Tex and I and Ron Serradano started working on their books. They had a little publishing company, and they were doing hardbound 200-page one-shots. And
I'm a huge collector of Tex Smith books.
Oh yeah, I got them all.
I might be missing one, but at Street Rod Nationals this year, there's always a guy. I'm not going to tell you where, so everybody can't find out. See, my wife's sneering right now. This guy always has books and stuff like that. And all the Tex Smith books are the soft cover, not the hardbound ones that I have.
Yeah.
And there was one there that was signed. I have one now that was signed by Tex Smith. And then I bought another one of the Barris books that was signed by Barris, and something else was signed by. So I have a signed Tex Smith hardbound book. But I've learned so much. I still go back every once in a while, look at a Tex Smith book, just that how to chop tops and all that stuff. Man, people forget that was the YouTube before YouTube.
Yeah. He was the first influence. He was one of the first.
You were talking about rod action. I have a bunch of rod actions too.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I grab a couple out of a box in the shop and I sit down, drink a water, have a snack or something, and I'll go look at an old rod action. So I found a Dale Besh picture. I found an old Roger Berman picture when Berman built the turquoise with the pink shredded graphics on it. Yes. And then right before the Triple Crown, I texted a 1988 issue. The 40 Ford Coupe that Gary Case built, that turquoise one.
Yes.
And I sent him a picture. He goes, "Were you still in diapers?" I go, "No, I was 17 at the time." But yeah, I really remember that car. But that was a good magazine title too. That was a really good one.
Yeah, those are fun ones. Tex did 6 hardbound books, and I've got them all. His biggest seller was We Came in Peace, and it was about. It was done by Shell Oil, and it was given out at the Shell gas stations, and it was about the lunar landing, the lunar module, and all that, yeah. And 68, 69, somewhere in there. And so that was a big deal. And when people start showing me their Tex Smith books, and then I show them mine, and I whip out all the hardback books, then they freak out. And then when I show them They Came in Peace, they go absolutely nuts, because those are hard to come by. Yeah. My guy for getting that kind of material, now that we're onto it, and he's the one that got me all of the McMullen record album covers. You know Jerry Dixie. Mm-hmm. You have to know Jerry. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Jerry's got his memorabilia company.
Which I still think he probably has one of the best hair in hot rodding, right? In street riding. He still does. It's a great hair.
The king of the mullet.
Yeah.
He is so deep and so entrenched and so knowledgeable about all facets of our hobby that he is a fun one to talk to. Mm-hmm. So it's always great talking about memorabilia goodies with him.
He'd be a good interview on this podcast too. He really would.
Oh, yeah. And if you get him going down the rabbit hole with any of these collectible things, stand back. I still get from time to time, and we were laughing about it at the Triple Crown of Rodding here a few weeks ago. He still mails to me from time to time, a couple of times a year, a magazine, an old magazine, and it's a picture of me, and I go, I don't remember that. Or it's the article, and it says, by Brian Refrigerant Brennan, back in the days when we used middle names, funny middle names. And
did you ever have an article, while you're saying the names, that you didn't want to be associated with, and you had a fake byline name?
Oh yeah, there were some articles that it just wasn't my style, especially in buyer's guides. When we had to do those advertising buyer's guides, I was not one to use my real name.
See, I did that for Fortier in the truck magazines once. We did a real quick 63 4.5 Chevy truck short bed when those first started coming on. We still lived in Illinois, so over 15 years ago. White walls, bias ply tires, small block fin stuff on it. And as soon as we got it done, we sold it. Yeah. And he's like, "Oh, man, I'll shoot it if you're not going to be at this event." "No, it's going away." Yeah. He goes, "Shoot me a couple pictures." And at that time, we could email him, and he could look to see if it was good enough.
Yeah.
And he goes, "Yep," and write me a story. And I have to look up that magazine. He came up with a name for the writer and the photographer to not let people know that Tim Strange wrote it. I forget I got to look that up. Before we interview Rob on this, I got to find that magazine and figure out what fake name that he gave me. So,
well, I will tell you this about Rob. He, in today's crop of guys who are out there doing, I don't care if you're an influencer or just web content or whatever you want to call it, he is one of the more talented writers out there. He possesses the creativity in writing that everyone wants, but he couples that with the fact that he really does like what he's writing about, and he understands it and he appreciates it. So
he doesn't really smile on the outside, and I learned he's not a hugger. He's not a hugger.
No. And because of that, I want to always run up to him and hug him, and I always want to, say nice things to him, and then of course he's had his fill with me, and he turns around and walks away. But
I've snuck up before, and I think I might have he might have punched me in the testicles. I'm not really sure. So one of my first my first Rob Fortier meeting went a little better than my first time with Baskerville. One of my favorite magazines ever was Custom Rodder. That's just the stuff that I'm into. I wish there was some of the stuff they call custom rods now. To me, is not a custom rod when it's a 59 Impala with all the door handles and stuff on it. It's just a 50 street machine. I hate the term resto mod. So please don't ever, if you had another title, don't do a magazine called Resto Mods. I'm not subscribing to it. I think that name was just brought up by auctioneer TV people because they didn't know what a street machine was. But we built this 54 Chevy we stole, and it was a tube frame, round tube, big block DeLordo, like Weber's on it, Budnick wheels, tweed interior, but it was a custom. It was chopped, and my 54, we still have it. Custom taillights, extended, different bumpers, full on custom Pro Street with tweed.
Yep.
Well, we went to the KKWA Lead Sled Spectacular. Again, we weren't married yet, so long time ago. I don't think the first year, I think I was still working at the body shop, so it might have been over 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. And we took it up there, and it didn't really fit in, even though Jerry Wiesner was always a big supporter in Custom Rodder. He was the editor back then. And I had other participants. What is the material in that car? They'd never seen tweed at this tuck and roll type show, Yeah. And I remember in the event coverage, they had a show field that you pull in, and there's a picture in Custom Rodder in color about, like 6 pictures on a page, and it's across the thing, and I'm in there cleaning, and Wiesner wrote, "This is Tim Strange. He is only 23 years old, and we expect big things from him in the future." And I was like, that was the coolest thing anybody had ever written about me. I was 23 with this car. So, okay, we really want it to be in Custom Rodder. Yeah. And, Rob was there shooting stuff. And at that time, one of the freelance guys from that part of the country was Harley Koopman. Remember Harley?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
He had a really cool golf cart that he drove around. And he's shooting it, and we're by the horse barns. And, well, that happened to be the place where 48 chose to shoot. He doesn't remember this. I tell him this story all the time. He's shooting there, too. And we're sitting on the fence waiting to move the car for Harley Koopman. And he looks over when Harley's up by the car, and he goes, "What the hell are you having him shoot that car for?" And I go, "Well, he says he'll put it in Custom Rodder." He goes, "I work for Custom Rodder. I know that," I said. He goes, "Why are you having him shoot it?" I go, "Because you didn't want to?" And he don't remember saying that. I said, "You kind of blew me off." And he goes, "Well, now I have to pay because we want the car in the magazine." That was the first time Rob told me that. Yeah. I would have waited till whenever it fit in Rob's schedule. But he goes, "Now we got to pay the freelancer." So I was like, "Oh, okay." But it did get in Custom Rodder. So
hey, you got your goal. That's what was important.
Yeah. Custom Rodder always treated me very good. We were in the Dave Bell cartoon twice through the years, and Carrie was drawn in it, and Riviera. So yeah, it was really cool. So I really liked that magazine.
Do you remember T's Design and Tom Ashton?
I do. His son is still doing T's, and my OBS, my 92, I have a set of T seats that are already covered. I'm putting T seats in my 92 OBS.
You now remember where tweed came from. So.
That 54 Chevy.
Yep.
He hooked us up. And he gave us half price T seats for that car.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. And then another name that you mentioned, Dave Bell. It was fun. Each month, Dave would call me, and he'd say, "What are you putting in this issue?" And I go, "I don't know. It's not deadline yet." But we would come up with something, and that's what he would use as some of the idea. He had other things, but after a while, he'd say, "Hey, do you know any stories about what's going on or anything that happened?" And so I'd start telling him stories, and then he would use those for kernels to start constructing the cartoon.
And then he'd always write the little notes in there. So And some of you guys now know Dave Bell was like the ending cartoon. Like BMX Plus had Radical Rick cartoon at the end of every one. And in the Street Rodder, it was Henry High Rise.
Yep.
In Custom Rodder, it was Nate Model, like late model.
Yeah.
And it was like just a really cool play on words. So I had seen him, met him a few times. And the last time I got to see him, it was probably, I don't know, less than a year or two before Dave Bell passed away. And he did a poster for the Grand National Roadster Show, and he was signing them. Yep. I got him to sign one, and he wrote on there, "To Tim, I'm always a super fan of you," or something. It's hanging in my shop. Yep. And he goes, "I want to offer you something." He goes, "I don't do this very often." He goes, "I want to draw a business card for you for no money." And like Jack Walker had one drawn and stuff like that. And I never followed up with him before he passed away, or I could have been having a custom Dave Bell Strange Motion business card still.
Now, that'd have been very cool.
I kicked myself for not doing that.
Well, keep this in mind. If you do bring Tom Taylor on for a second time, ask him, do you remember doing Brian Brennan's business card when he was at Rod Action? And what he did for me, it was what you would expect, but we reversed everything. So it was a black card with white type rather than the white. Okay. So we did that, and it was, and it had a profile of a high boy and all that. So it was a fun card, and I always remember it got people's attention. And so I always thank Tom for doing that. And that was,
I've tried, and during our podcast, because I got a 40 Merc project out in the barn behind the house here.
Yeah.
I was like, I would love to work with Tom Taylor on a project. And so far he's turning me down. He's not really drawing cars right now, but I'm not going to give up. I think that would be really cool to have work with Tom Taylor on a design of a car.
Whether it's Dave Bell or Tom Taylor or any number of these artists that are out there now, but like Steve Stanford, who did my gasser for me, he did the interior and the exterior and did all of the artwork. I like working with them because they were still pencil to paper, and I understand. Computers are here and technology is what it is, and it's phenomenal. I get AI, I understand what a tool is, but there is something therapeutic about watching a man with a great deal of talent, or woman, who can take a piece of paper and pick up that pencil, and an hour later they have created something where nothing was, and you go, frick, that just poured out of their mind. That it just went from their mind through their hand through that pencil. And I'm just fascinated by that. The most
fascinating artist, of course, all those guys are legendary. But when you go through an autograph line and you see Chip Foose signing autographs at SEMA, and the first time he talked to this younger person, it wasn't a young kid because they're not supposed to have a lot of young kids in SEMA. Yeah. Well, what kind's your car? And he flipped his mind. He drew it upside down for the person so they can watch it. I was like, that chips from another planet. That's what I said.
I'm going to give you where that came from. Chip was at the Art Center, and so was Taylor. And you remember Harry Bentley Bradley, the Wienermobile, and all kinds of other great designs. Buick Riviera.
Which the C10 Talk guys, I don't know how they did it.
Yeah.
About a year and a half before Harry Bradley passed away, Ronnie from C10 Talk, he did a podcast. He interviewed Harry Bradley. You have to look that up. It's an incredible interview.
That would be very good. Harry was in my office one day because we wanted to do a series of drawings, and he did that same thing. He drew in this case, it was a Buick Riviera and then a Corvette. He was explaining how Detroit was in a phase where cars had a Coke bottle design, which was really the female figure. It was the general shape, and he was doing this upside down. And he got halfway done before I realized what the hell just happened. But at the art school, he was leaning up against the chalkboard, and he had his cane under one arm, not his cane, his what am I trying to say? Anyway, it was the cane.
Yeah, because he had polo as a kid, right? So he walked with those.
Yeah.
forearm crutch things, whatever those are called.
Right.
Yeah.
He was holding himself up against the blackboard with the crutch, and then over his head, he was drawing on the blackboard a car design that he's talking about. And
Oh my goodness.
he'd get to a point, and then he'd draw the wheel, and then he'd get, okay, now here at the grill show, and then we do this. When it was all done, it was a perfectly perspective drawing of an automobile that everyone in class, and Chip and Tom were there, saw it and understood it, and then realized, oh crap.
So Harry was an instructor there for both Tom Taylor and Foose?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And there's some great stories that Chip tells about getting into that school, and Taylor tells, and all of that. So you gotta ask those guys those stories. But
the cat came back.
Yes, I see that. Mine got tired because I won't shut up, and so he left. He went, oh, you're back. How you doing, Roxy? He's back. But there are so many, and I know I've said this to you in the past. We all love the cars. I get it. The cars are cool. For every hot rod that's out there, there's a different, mentality that built it, and that's great. But it's the people that I find so fascinating, and that really make me keep coming back. Because when you become invested in someone and they become invested in you, now your conversations are more than superficial. They become about life, things that happen. And you find out stories about why a guy does what he does, and he gives you that clue. And so to me, the people in our hobby are just fantastic. It's what makes it all go around.
So then you came back to Street Rodder after working at Rod Action and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then when did you become the main editor of Street Rodder? Was it instantly when you came back, or were you there and then worked your way up a little bit?
No, I was working for Vet Magazine and Muscle Mustangs and Fastboards and doing all that.
See, that's what a lot of people don't know, how much of a big vet guy you are, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I still have 2 Corvettes. We're still finishing up my 71 right now. I drag race Corvettes. I mean, I've had 62 Corvettes.
You said you got, what are your years of your vets you currently have?
Well, the 68 is finished, and I can drive that at the turn of a key. And the 71 is painted and back on the chassis, and is now in the assembly phase. And it has the engine and trans in it and all that sort of thing.
So my dad has had a few vets through the years. He traded a 57 gasser tilt front end tunnel ram car for a 69 small block 4-speed maroon with a black vinyl lift-off top, 4-speed car.
Yep.
Rally wheels, nothing fancy, just a nice, clean, faded paint, and we rubbed on it and polished it up. And when I bought my first 55 Chevy by selling my 4-H show pigs when I was 8. So about 9, 10, I learned to drive a 4-speed in that Corvette, my dad's Corvette.
Well, that's how I learned how to drive a 4-speed, was in the 57 Corvette. It was a 3-speed when we started, and by the end of the night, we broke it. And so that had to come out. Then we put a 4-speed in. That lasted about a year, and then we blew up the 265. And then
it was a 57 vet. What year was your personal first vet? What year was it?
62.
Okay.
62. Yeah.
My brother-in-law's got a 62. His dad bought brand new, and my brother-in-law has that now.
Yeah. We owned that for 30 years. And then, life has a way of saying, if you're going to do that, you're going to give me this, and so the Corvette went away.
Speaking of vets, real quick, how long did you work at the Vet Magazine?
Well, I 10-ish years, something like that. And the last 2 or 3 years, and many people don't realize this, I was doing Street Rodder in the daytime, and I was doing Vet Magazine at night. Because
so was Vet Magazine still going? Was it still a title when they cut all the titles?
Yeah. And they were going to kill it years before. And I said, no. I said, there's a place for it. Well, we're not going to give you any buyout budget, and there's no staff. And I said, don't kill it. I'll take care of it. And they go, how are you going to do it? I said, don't worry about it. I'll figure it out. And so for probably at least 3 years, maybe 4, I did Vet Magazine at night. And what it did, though, is when I got the word out that I was looking for vet material, I started with the hot rod guys, Well, then I found out how many hot rod guys love vets, not the least of which was Alloway. And so they started opening doors up for me and helping me get material. And of course, all the freelancers love shooting Corvettes. So it all worked. And then as I got deeper, more entrenched with the true Corvette people, well, they just started opening up all the doors, and it worked. Now it made for some.
So if you're a Corvette guy, how many pair of jean shorts do you own, and how many pair of white New Balance tennis shoes do you own?
Okay, there are different families of Corvette owners.
Okay,
there are
please explain.
They are the guys who I break off at 72, and some guys fight me and say it should be cut off at 67. But I say there's the first generation through Gen 2 Corvette owners that ends in now that's the start of Gen 3.
So you're a big fan of vets all the way up to the ending of the chrome bumpers.
You got it. When the chrome bumpers went away, Corvette ceased to exist. Now, I must confess, the C7, which was the last of the front engine cars, pretty spectacular car.
Yeah, I like. That's my favorite later model car. Yeah. Is the C7. Yeah. I like the C8s. It's a GM supercar.
Yep.
To me, it doesn't scream Corvette to me. Yeah, it's a great car. I've known a couple guys that had them. It's a great bang for the buck.
Yep.
But to me, the last of the real vets was the 7s. I think the C7. I'm not a big late model guy, but the C7s are incredible looking, I think.
Well, see, that's when I divide Corvette owners. There was the chrome bumper crowd, the pre-chrome bumper crowd, the big blocks, the true big blocks, and the true small blocks, and the fuel injection.
So what kind of tennis shoes do they wear? They don't wear New Balance and jean shorts? This is very confusing to me.
No. I wore tennis shoes with my Corvettes and still do, but they are a little ratty. But then
are they white New Balance?
No, actually I wear Asics. What I call the gold chain crowd and the alpaca sweaters and all of that, they were the later C3, C4 Corvette owners. They're not, this is not going to set well, but to me, they were not Corvette owners, and the Corvette by then had lost its luster. So
let's be clear. If anybody wants to buy me any generation of Corvette, I will gladly take it and drive it. I like, because you can still get them. It's the one that Berman drives with the Eat More Possum on the front, like the early 80s ones that are kind of affordable, kind of squarey ones.
Yeah.
I dig the terrible looking dashes and designs in the interior. But I would take one of those. I think those are still pretty cool.
I don't think you fit well enough for a Corvette.
It's tough for me to get in and out of the Corvette. But thinking of that one that Greenings did with John Hall.
Oh.
Jesse looks like a little kid sitting in it. Man, there's all kinds of room in that. They did a lot of cool moves. I think a lot of people missed what they did to that car until I seen Jesse driving that around. And that thing, of course, anything Greenings builds incredible.
Yeah. So to me, a real Corvette owner is a hot rodder, and he wants to tinker with something, and so that's got to be a pre-72 car.
So I kind of agree with you on that. So there is a vet chrome bumper car that's, I don't know who did it. It gets shared on hot rod pages on Facebook, and it's got non-polished American 5-spokes. And I'm not the biggest American 5-spoke guy. I like different stuff, but it's got bigs and littles. It's got a little rake, and it's lowered in the front. It's got a lift-off black vinyl top like my dad's. That thing just screams hot rod Corvette, man. I don't know if you've seen that car I'm talking about. I don't know whose it is, who shot the pictures, or what else. But then there was, in the Street Machine and Pro Street display at the Roadster Show this year, I absolutely love that one. It's got a blower motor, and it's got like the 80s, all the crazy colors on it.
Yes, yeah.
And the big Halibrands on it. Oh, my God, is that thing incredible.
I'm pretty sure I ran a picture of that car in our Grand National Roadster Show coverage this year. See, to me, and this is an interesting point of reference that I try to tell younger hot rodders. In the early days, and when I say early days of hot rodding, it's not really early, but in the late 50s and 60s, hot rodders always went out and bought Corvette parts because they were the go-fast parts. So if you went to the Chevy dealer, you bought a Duntov cam. And that was a Corvette.
I don't know how many local cruise nights growing up when I had my Chevelle with a 283. Everybody else was faster. I got a Corvette motor in this thing.
There you go.
It probably wasn't a Corvette motor, but by God, that's what they thought it was.
Well,
I got the Corvette cam in it.
How many sets of Corvette fin valve covers must there be?
Yeah, right.
Yes. And so Corvettes and early hot rods to me have a simpatico. They do go, in my mind, they do go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. And it's because so many of the parts were interchangeable, meaning guys building a 32 Roadster, it was not uncommon to see a mechanical EFI motor under the hood. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't uncommon to see some sort of Borg Warner, a T10 or something like that transmission. And of course, now I'm going to wander off, but there was the days when Super Bell came into existence, and Jim always looked at early Porsche parts because that's where some of his early brake kits came from. And he looked at what Corvettes were doing because that's where some of his later brake kits, the bigger kits came from. Mm-hmm. And, that's what we did. Corvettes meant you went fast. And if you had a hot rod, you wanted to go fast. So you got Corvette parts.
So one more thing on the Corvettes did you ever own a newer non-chrome bumper vet? Did you ever have like a driver 80s, 90s? You seriously stopped at the chrome bumper era?
Yeah. Yeah. The only time I ever drove later Corvettes is when Chevrolet would give them to me to drive. And the one I couldn't pass up, when Chevrolet introduced the new the C8 Corvette that came out in 2020, they did it at the old Marine Lighter Than Air Base that's right a couple of blocks from where I live. It's the El Toro Air Station. And they invited X number of car club guys who were Corvette guys to bring all their Corvettes. So here are all these new Corvettes. They asked me to bring my 68. To me, a 68 is not an early Corvette, but I had by far the earliest Corvette that was there. So it was fun to see my 68 next to a 2020 that was just being introduced to the world, the magazine press and all that. So that was kind of fun. So I got to drive a 2020 for a while, and what can I say? I mean, the car is amazing, You get into my 68. It's a 68 Chevy. The door rattles when you close, and the wind has wind noise, and the air conditioning is something to be desired, and you can overheat in traffic. So there we go. But
so before we move on to the killing of all the magazines, what other cars have you had? You had a Roadster. Let's talk about some of the other hot rod stuff real quickly that you have had through your time, other than pets.
I mean, as far as new cars went, I had a series of Chevys, Nova SS's from the late 60s and the early 70s. I had those. Then, of course, I had my 56 Chevy that I tinkered with a little bit. And then I had a 48 Chevy pickup truck. That was fun. That was actually very fun. It's living in New Zealand right now. And then you may have remembered my Little Lakes modified car. It was on the January cover of 2000, the Millennium issue. And then, of course, now I've had a 29 Roadster pickup. I've got a 28 closed cab pickup. I've got.
I love those. I definitely don't fit in one of those.
No,
I don't.
Well, you would mind. Mine is a Brookville bodied extended cab 28 closed cab pickup truck. That Poteet went to Brookville and said, "I want one of these Model A pickup trucks, but I can't fit in it. But can you extend that?" So they extended one for him, and then they asked, "Hey, can we keep the tooling and whatnot and make them and sell them to hot rodders?" So that's how I got mine. Still have it. I keep it at Hot Rods by Dean. Drives Dean nuts because I've got my 55 Chevy there. I've got my 61 Corvette there. I've got my 28 closed cab pickup. He goes, Brian, I could be making a fortune or at least turning a profit if you'd get your shit out of my shop. So
what's the 55?
It's a gasser, and it's a gasser style, and it's body number 2 or 3 from when they started importing the steel bodies. Okay, and Chris Saunders and that deal. Yeah,
Yeah, I work with Chris. I'm the MC for his Tri-5 show.
Right. And so Chris helped me get an early body and a gasser chassis that he had, a frame, really.
What color is yours?
I call it pagan gold. I tried to get Stanford to recreate a gold that we might have used in the early 60s on customs and whatnot. So and then I went to PPG and I go, here, can you make anything that looks like this? And they did. So they made it for me, and so we got it.
Didn't Dean build you a Roadster once too? Or am I confusing that with somebody else's?
No, Dean's, every car I drive, Dean's done. Dean built, I still have it. My little, it started on my 50th birthday, so that would have been 1998. Magoo, you remember Magoo?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
He gave me the frame, the 32 frame, as a SoCal frame, just a bare frame, as my birthday present, turning 50. And he gave it to me at Dean's shop, and so that was kind of like my 50th birthday party, and we did it there, and the frame was the present. And then I said, wow, man, I got to build a high boy that's kind of like the ones we used to have. And it was at that point that Dean knew he screwed up, and because it never left his shop until he built it. And it's still an everyday driver. I mean, you go in, you turn the key, it fires right up and goes right down the road. Great.
Dean builds a great car.
Oh, yeah.
He has the look. I remember, I'm not going to say whose the car was and what the car was, but we were at SEMA, and this new whiz-bang street machine showed up. That was all the rage of the SEMA show, and this was before Battle of the Builders and all that. I remember it was me, him, and Zane Cullen for Katati Speed Shop standing there looking at this thing, and it's just full of every details and moved and everything. And Dean goes, huh, if this is what I got to build, I effing quit. And Zane was like, yeah, true words never. And the car's incredible.
Yeah, no, I get it.
But he was, because Dean and Zane are both hot rod guys. They like bigs and littles, and they like traditional stuff, and some modern stuff and Pro Tour stuff. But they're hot rod guys, both of those. And I mean that in every sense of the complimentary word, that they're hot rod guys.
I can't tell you how many stories I've heard from hot rodders who want their car featured, and they show me the pictures or they show me the car, and they tell me they've made 100 modifications. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking you should have stopped at 3.
And I love customs. Customs are my favorites and lead sleds. But again,
that's a different deal.
Yeah,
they're trying
like Barris, through the years of Barris, when he got crazy modifications, and it's like, if you ever look at the record list that Elvis put out, he put out a lot of records. Yeah. They weren't all, blue suede shoes and all that stuff, and Love Me Tender. And the same thing with the list of Barris cars. But when he got it right, he got it right. And same thing with Elvis, right?
Yeah, there's no question about that. And I still have a 72 Chevy Suburban now that we've redone, and it's a daily driver. I think I have a dozen cars. And I have to call Dean up and ask him, what do I got in the warehouse over there that we're
Do you have kids?
I have a daughter, but remember, I'm old. So my daughter is a mature woman, and I have grandkids now, so.
See, that's always my joke when people doesn't have family members. I let everybody know that I am up for adoption.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And when I say that I'll call you daddy, it just sounds dirty when I say it. It doesn't mean to come out that way. While we're on the subject of cars,
we've been on the subject of cars for 2 hours.
Before we move on, do you have any good embarrassing stories on Rob Fortier?
I probably do, but I'm going to spare Rob the embarrassment. Let's put it that way.
That's like when we interviewed Wings Callahan on here once, right?
Yes.
And Wings hanging out in the Street Rod Nationals parking lots at nights. Oh, man, he'd get telling stories from the 70s, 80s, and he would not say any on here. He goes, well, this recording is forever. I'm not going to throw my buddies under the bus. There was one slightly censored story about a streaking thing in the 70s, and that's about all we got out of him. But it's like, yeah, this is forever, so I understand you can't throw anything up. So when we interview Rob, I just might make something up that you said something embarrassing. See if he calls himself out. Oh, it was the one time when I did this. And he could just tell on himself.
Yeah, I remember the streaking craze. It went for 2 Street Rod Nationals. It started in Memphis one year and ended up at St. Paul the next. And let me tell you that is one of those golden moments. They talk about having memories pressed between the pages of your mind, Barbara Streisand. And I will spend the rest of my life and never forget that nugget and the things that happened and the things I saw, the things I can't get out of my mind. They're there forever.
It was 70s, right? Streaking was big.
It was about 73, 4, 5, somewhere right in there. And
so now I'm glad streaking isn't a thing because no offense, but some of these older gentlemen, you'd see way more because it would take them way longer to run or hobble across. I mean, I'm not as fast a runner as I used to be.
And there's probably
my wife tells me all the time I don't look as good naked as I used to. So I'm not a streaker anymore.
Yeah, remember at the time our industry in the mid 70s was made up of guys in their late 20s and early 30s.
Mm-hmm.
I.e., the women were in their late 20s and early 30s. Mm-hmm. And that's another thing that I miss. And I have only myself to blame for getting older. I no longer have the horsepower to do the things I used to do or stay up and do all the things that we did back in the early days. I can remember the NSRA people going nuts because none of us would ever go to bed and we'd be out in the street all night. I mean, all night long, just yelling and screaming and hooting.
I met more of my hot rod heroes in a hotel parking lot than I did at the car show.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there you go. And that's the people thing I'm talking about. And that's the friendship that you make that you don't lose.
I'm thankful that more business was done in the parking lot than it was actually at the show.
I'm thankful I didn't go to as many shows. I did KKOA and Street Rod Nationals in the late 70s. My great uncle would take me, but I'm glad that we're not in the generation where we've seen a lot of naked people running around. But, they do say if you hang around your buddy long enough, you will see his junk eventually. So, okay, we need to change this. We need to change this subject here. Well, so while we were talking about your...
Just one quick note on that. You and I almost reached a point of no impasse here with Alloway and Johnson on the stage at the Triple Crown. So we survived that one. No.
Okay, so we're talking about some of your personal cars. Is there another dream car? Like, I want a 40 Ford Coupe, or is there a 50 Merc, or is there another car that you would love to have in your collection, whether buy one done or one to build?
There's several. I will never get that 62 Pontiac Grand Prix white with a black interior 389 tri-power out of my mind. I will always have that in my head. And if I were to win the lotto, that would be, other than making Kimmy as happy as I could possibly make her, and she's over here laughing. That I literally would be on a warpath to find that. I mean, because that car is something that I go back to. I didn't own it.
What wheels did it have on it? Did it have the 6-lug wheels?
The 8-lug. It had the
8-lug.
Yeah, that cost $1 bazillion. Nowadays, you find the original stuff.
That's a very cool wheel.
It was the perfect car. I mean, he had it right, and I would, and I would drive it. I would drive the living bejesus out of it. I mean, that would just be the coolest thing in the world to drive.
There's always something that clicks your trigger as a kid. Of course, my dad always had really cool tilt front end Gasser 57, tilt front end 55. But like his buddy had a Pro Street on aluminum slots, big block, tunnel ram, dual quad, tilt front end, orange and cream 55 sedan, Steve Scharfenberg, that I still would absolutely love to have a car just like that. We had a local guy. It was in magazines. It was Charlie Chad's car before. Charlie Chad still now, right?
Yeah.
It was it was a drag race car, Gasser with a chrome firewall, and it was red. Then it turned to be orange when Earl Nelson bought it. And then Earl lowered it and, hammered it and painted it Fruhoff yellow. And it was in magazines and all these stuff. And those were just like the local badass cars of me growing up, and local guy that I'd get to go to his garage all the time because he was friends with the guy I worked with a body shop in high school. He had the most perfect late 70s Model A sedan, brown with 5 spokes and a rake on it, and the tires stuck out just a little bit, that 70s look at the fenders. And Mick Greenman's cars. Like those are like, man, those cars are like trip switches in my in my mind.
And the other thing you too to think about, it's not only cars. I love V8s, okay, all of them.
Mm-hmm.
But if I could, I'd love to have the Mystery 427 or an original L88 on an engine stand that I could just sit and look at because of the stories that surrounded that engine, whether it be NASCAR or drag racing or whatever.
So can your wife hear us?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Would you be allowed to restore one of those motors, make it a coffee table, and put it in the living room?
Would you?
I could, at this point, whatever makes you happy.
She goes and
see, I want to do like a crazy hand-built motorcycle that doesn't run like a blown-up Triumph motor and build it and put it in. We have big ceiling the floor windows and put it in the living room. She goes, you're not putting a motorcycle in our living room.
Yes.
Well, I go, Rob Ida did it. If Rob Ida can do it, why can't I? You know? Yeah.
No, that's see, I'd love to have a car, and I'd love to have a motor, and then there's probably a drag car in there somewhere that I'd love to recreate, and it might be Dickie Harrell's first Nova, you know, the old square body, the 64 5 style, 62 3/4.
So Dickie Harrell was from just south of Monmouth, Illinois.
Yeah.
And see, I grew up. My dad's family was originally from Monmouth and Macomb in that area, so they always had this cruise night, and they bring in all the old cars that they could.
Yeah.
You know, the ZL1 Camaros and, you know, aluminum block. And I'm not a big Camaro fan, but just seeing that stuff is, very cool.
And of course, I love Candy Red, so somewhere in there I'd have to have a Stone Woods and Cook gasser, and I almost have one when the not the recreation, the restoration of the old Stone Woods and Cook car was occurring. Josh, you know Josh Shaw?
Oh yeah, which he's scheduled in 3 weeks. We're going to do him in like 2 or 3 weeks.
You have to say hi for me. He is one of my all-time favorites. He is so fantastic. But his dad, you know, for many, many moons was a hand letterer and a pinstriper, that sort of thing, and lettered race cars forever. Well, they were doing the big John Masmanian gasser, and he knew I loved that car, he and his dad. One day, this humongous box shows up in the mail, and I open it up, and it's a door it's a gasser door painted in the candy red and properly lettered.
Wow.
Everything on it. And they go, this is the best we could do. And I just thought, and the backside, they've signed it and a little note to me.
That is awesome.
Yeah, you see, it's that kind of stuff. You know, there are cars, there are race cars, there are motors.
Some of these people don't know Josh Shaw was involved, even as a younger kid. He's a little bit younger than me, with Wade Hughes, and they laid all the Alloway Flames out for years.
Well, we call them the Ohio Flames. You know, that style of flames, call the Ohio Flames. Wade Hughes, we used to call the large round mound. You know, I mean, we had nicknames for all of them. In fact, if you were to go into Alloway's shop, he still has Josh Shaw painting caricatures of hot rods and whatnot up on the shop walls. And it's fantastic, you know. And Josh, and that's another thing. Josh should get a lot of credit for the basement at the Detroit Autorama, because he was the guy that Larrabee Sr. and Jr. both went to put all that together. And he did the first 2-3 of them, you know.
I'm not going to share too many stories that I know about Josh, because we want them to come out on his podcast. But he has done some incredible stuff, got in some incredible trouble at shows that we have been and seen. And he'll throw himself under the bus and tell stories on himself. So some of these are going to be incredible. So the 22nd, I think he's scheduled. We're going to interview him. So
you're going to have a winner there, because that boy, now he's a man, but that boy has got some stories.
Yeah.
So
okay, so now let's move up, because we're almost 2 hours. But what year was it, and how did this happen when they killed 19 magazines that day? I get up, I get on Instagram, and the first thing I seen was David Freiberger's post. You know, end of an era, all this, and I'm like, I am such a magazine collector. I just today had a buddy from Milwaukee deliver. My wife's not a big magazine fan, but she paid the people for PayPal over 400 issues of Hot Rod.
Oh, yeah.
I probably had most of them, but they're in leather binders and all this stuff that my buddy delivered to me. So I'm a huge collector. John McGann, the current editor of Hot Rod, says, I currently have more Hot Rod magazines than Hot Rod themselves have because they've scanned and they don't have a copy of every issue of Hot Rod. It's very sad that they haven't kept their history.
No.
How did this come down, and what was the feelings when you got that? Did you see it coming?
Oh, hell yeah. By the way, John McGann was my photo studio assistant when Randy Lorenzen was our studio photographer. John was the assistant and worked in the studio. And
Randy Lorenzen is the one that found this Hot Rod magazine collection for me in 69.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Because I was considered a director at the time and I had a group of books and a department under me, I didn't know all the backstory, but I was given some of the early information. And when Discovery took us over, the Discovery Channel really makes their bones in television programming. And the advertising dollars they talk about doing that are mind-boggling compared to what a magazine could do. They never understood print. And when you say end of an era, 19 magazines were killed of the 21, the era didn't end. It was their vision or their lack of vision, or just this is what they wanted to do, ceased to exist. Because in my opinion, the era did not end. It needed to change, but it didn't need to end. Discovery decided that we want to get more and more into the video and less into the print world, because the print world is very difficult to do because newsstand sales were very hard to come by. And anyone who understands, in order to make newsstand sales work, you have to print 100 magazines in the hope of selling 35 to 45 copies. Well, that's a crazy business model. That's never going to work. So everyone knew, as we do now, newsstand sales are a loser. Subscriptions are a loser. You have to make all the money you're going to exist on in advertising. But the Discovery Channel, and this would have been back in about it was probably earlier this, but in 1990, in about 2018-ish, I started getting the first indications we're going to need to kill some magazines in order to keep the healthy ones around. And so some books were starting to get knocked off onesie, twosie.
Yeah, they killed Popular Hot Rodding early on, didn't they?
Yeah, and they killed some of the Ford Mustang books and things like that. And then the motorcycle magazines, they went away or were sold. When I say went away, they either were killed or sold. And I remember talking to Tom Vogley and Tim Foss at the time, and I'm going, there's some handwriting on the wall here. There's something else going on. This is not the end of this rope. And then about 2019 and 2020, we start getting rumblings that we're going to drastically reduce the size of the automotive titles, and we're going to be letting a number of people go. And that's going to be that. And it's going to happen here within the next 2 years, maybe. Well, about December 8th of 2019, I think it was, we got a notice that we're killing 19 of the 21 books. And everybody's jaws just hit the ground. And it was at the Grand National Roadster Show, I believe on a Friday, when everyone's Blackberries blew up. Saying you have just been let go. We've killed your magazine, and that's that.
I remember seeing Fortier that day.
All of them. I mean, all the guys. Nick Licata and Fortier and all the.
Wait, you still using a BlackBerry then?
Maybe we had gone to Apple. No, we'd gone to Apple. Yeah, 98, 99 was the BlackBerry. So yes, we had gone to Apples, and in all fairness, they did have some nice severance packages, especially if you had some years of service accumulated. But they remained the option of keeping people if they wanted to. So I couldn't take the severance package and leave. I had to stay. If I wanted the severance package, I couldn't have it. If I wanted to leave, I got nothing. So they had me over a barrel, so I stayed because I would have taken the severance package and left because mine would have been very nice.
If you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. Why were you not offered a severance package? Because you'd been there for a long time.
Yeah.
At a high time.
That's why they didn't want to get rid of me, because I had too much coming. And in some twisted sense, they figured I was needed on the staff, and so they moved me over to Hot Rod. And so that's where I spent the last 3 months of, my life, because they let everyone go. They stopped the magazines right in the middle. The 50th anniversary issue of Street Rodder was literally at the press, and they shut it off. And so that didn't happen, as with all the other books. But the Discovery Channel had just made a decision that they wanted to go a different direction, and there was no room for print magazines. Mm-hmm. But when Tim and I left, and we decided, because we started in the garage media right after this all went down, mm-hmm. we couldn't buy the magazines, we couldn't buy the mailing list, we couldn't get anything. They wouldn't give us anything at any time.
If you listen to the podcast that we did with Tom Taylor, he talks about trying to buy the Rod and Custom title.
Yeah.
And actually putting an offer in when the trademark or copyright laxed by a few months, and then they wouldn't let him buy it even though he tried to buy it, because they let them, and then they bought it. And, there's people out there that want those titles, but they won't. It's like you have to buy all 19 titles, but not one, right? Is that the real thing?
No, they weren't selling any of them, because now I can't get into who, and I can't get into money, but we had the money. I'm talking about we had the money, and we could have bought 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 of the books. We wanted to buy Street Rodder, classic trucks, and all Chevy. We wanted to get those books. Super.
Because back then they did have some overlapping. There was 2 or 3 kind of vintage classic truck magazines. They had all Chevy, and then they had Super Chevy.
Yeah.
So there was some stuff that could have been, the little fat could have been trimmed there for a little bit, I think.
Well, what was interesting is even by their metrics, all of the books in the group that Tim was in charge of advertising wise, and I was in charge of editorially speaking, were all making money. I mean, money. And they were viable. By any description, they were viable publications. Nope. And they weren't going to sell them because they didn't want to create their own competition somewhere down the road. And in their mind, they figured, well, we get rid of all these titles, it's only going to bolster the advertising in Hot Rod, Motor Trend, and the off-road book that they kept. Well, the reality was no one went over. It just didn't happen. And in fact, in time, more left. Hey, kitty cat. Yeah, Roxy's still sitting here. So I'm sure it was the proper decision for them at the time, because they wanted to go a different way. It was a terrible decision to a lot of hot rodders and the industry in general. That's what the sad part was. First off, a lot of guys lost work, and women. A lot of people lost jobs. A lot of hot rodders had their wheels taken out from under them, and no books that they had had for nearly 50 years were gone, and there was no way to.
I know, like freelancers that had cars coming up in magazines, checks stopped, all that type of thing. So
all of that went away, and the industry. I mean, all of a sudden, you were left with all of these very solvent, very successful companies who lost their primary source of advertising. And the show promoters realized, oh, crap, we were relying on the magazines, not only for the magazines, but they had websites and social media. So there was that part of the equation too. They were losing all that. And it was very unfortunate. And it is what it is. And, Tim and I sat back and looked at it and said, I can't think of a better time to start a publication that requires $1 million when we're in COVID and we can't leave our house. I mean, I tell everyone it was a brilliant stroke of marketing, and Speedy Bill, before he passed away, told me, you guys are the luckiest 2 sons of bitches I ever met. And that's kind of the way it went down. It was the worst of times, But for us, it was the best of times, because what it did is it leveled the playing field real quick, and it gave us a chance to get going. And so many advertisers, many of which
people were sitting around reading magazines and reading books at that time again, weren't they?
Yep, yeah. And so
that's like all the normal sports got stalled, and BMX blew up because that's something they could do with their family and their kids outside. Bicycle sales went through the roof.
You know this better than anyone, Tim. Guys went out in their garage and dug out projects they hadn't worked on in years, or did.
I have friends, small mom and pop companies that the son is now running it. I'm not going to say, I'm not throw them, call them out, but the dad started, it's a many-year hot rod company. And he goes, we had the best sales ever in the history of our company during that time.
Sure.
His and he listened. So, hello, I'm not going to say your name. And he goes, my reasoning why, if somebody needed a $300 part, that maybe it was on the list of stuff that I need for my truck, my car, on the refrigerator, and you're stuck at home, and your wife is tired of you being in the house, here's your $300, order that part, go to the garage and work on your hot rod. That was his reasoning of it. And I'm like, dude, I think that's a pretty good explanation right there, because everybody, all the parts people that I deal with, they still did well.
I don't know of any one of the major companies who were there at the start of COVID and were there at the end of COVID who didn't have their best years ever. And I'm here to tell you, all of those government COVID survival checks, I know where a lot of that money went, and it kept our industry humming. And I have manufacturers at the Triple Crown that we just had who told me, business is good. We're not growing the way we were back during those 2 years of COVID, but our new normal is actually higher than it was before COVID. So that's it. It did something. It energized the industry and kicked it in the butt, and it's got it running. So
while we're talking about parts and products, and we'll continue on, you guys doing the magazine now, you have seen it all. Like we were on Wild Tech's advisory board, and when I was on the Pennsylvania one, they brought in Chuck Lombardo from California Street Rods. I've told this story a few times. Got to be really good friends with Chuck. Yeah. Business mentor, gave me some pointers and things and how to run the business side of it a little bit. And he's like, well, me and my buddies were one of the first people to show going to the junkyard and getting a Mustang 2 and putting it in one of our street rods. I don't know if it was in Street Rod or a Rod and Custom or Rod, but it was one of those that. Yeah. And then now you can order a Morrison, a Scott's Hot Rods, a Fat Man, Morrison Roadster Shop with Brembo brakes and independent rear ends. And did you ever think, when you've seen all these parts, that we would be at the era now? You can buy a brand new 32 steel body. You can buy a Tri-5 Chevy brand new reproduction steel body. It's absolutely incredible. Even in my time, 30 years running my shop, I miss the old junkyards. I used to have some great junkyards to go pick parts and stuff. And even me and my dad would go when I was a young kid to buy 57 Chevy trim once a month, Those junkyards are mostly gone. There's still some out there. But we can buy, if the guy has the money, they can build the most amazing car with a crate motor and all that I've never seen this in the history of hot rodding. Yeah, there was a time, people with the street rods, they give them a hard time about a catalog car. They order the Pete and Jake's chassis, and they order their Gibbons body, and they order their ZZ4 crate motor. But that's what everybody's doing now. Yeah, it's the same thing, but just higher technology, better handling, bigger brakes, and all that stuff. But seeing all that must be mind-blowing.
Yeah, I mean, you're referring to the 1-800 street rod. I mean, that's how parts were ordered. The first time I realized, this isn't Kansas anymore, was I was at the Street Rod Nationals in Oklahoma, and Jack Chisenhall showed up with his little Ford van, and he and his brother had an air conditioning company, and they retrofitted Japanese imports, new cars with air conditioning, because in Texas, you got to have air. Well, Jack's looking at this, and he was a hot rodder, and goes, hot rodders would probably like air conditioning. So he comes to the event, and he opens up his van, puts his table out, and I'm talking to him, and I'm going, what's this? He goes, this is air conditionings for street rods. Well, you wouldn't say street rod so much then. It was still air conditioning. This is air conditioning for a hot rod. And and I went, what? I said, why would a hot rodder want air conditioning? The same reason why you have air conditioning on in that rental car. And boy, the light bulb went on. And I went, oh my gosh, the page has turned. This is a new era. The world has changed. So that was my first clue something was coming. And it wasn't long after that all manner of electronics, if you could think of it, here come the parts. The power windows and the power windshield wiper kits and of course the air conditioning. And then, we get into things like, Ross Ortman with Dakota Digital and digital gauges. And then you have John McLeod with Classic Instruments. And of course, everyone knows Rick Love, but the early vintage air predated Rick. I mean, it came in before Rick. Rick came shortly thereafter. But the stuff you can order now, and then of course the factories, they understood. Man, we're selling a lot of crate motors. These crate motors can use computers. I guess we can sell computers too. So now they sell, turnkeys where you've got the engine and trans and the computer runs both, and it's plug and play. And that's where American Auto Wire and Painless came in, and here we go. When I first saw that, when Little John showed me the first billet part, I knew times were a-changing. But when Jack showed me the air conditioning, I realized the entire build was going to change. The types of cars we were going to build was going to change. And
the one that did it for me as a slightly younger hot rodder was, oh man, I forget his name now. He has passed away. I feel really bad. Street and Performance.
Oh, yeah.
From Arkansas.
Yeah.
I remember he would just sit. You go to Street Rod Nationals, it's just a hubbub because we're tuned port motors back then, right? Yeah. And he would sit there, and what I remember about him, he didn't want people to be scared about electronic fuel injection. I don't care whose kit you have. Ask me your tech questions. I will help you. That dude had a line every day at the Street Rod Nationals. Yep. And I feel really bad that I bought a lot of stuff, but I liked his billet brackets and everything worked. And he was just excellent to deal with, and customer service, man. He could write a book on how, now we can't get our refrigerator fixed, our ice machine, because we bought it that came with the house, and we can't prove that it didn't come from the store uptown. Yeah. It's like, are you kidding me? Well, that guy, it's on the tip of my tongue. Yeah. I can hear his voice, see his face. He's been gone for a handful of years now, but man, that's when I say the fuel injection stuff is when me at that time.
What was the name of the company? What?
Street and Performance. From Arkansas.
Yes. I'm trying to see.
They lived in the town in Arkansas. If you've watched that Tom Cruise movie called American Made, where they were flying drugs in and out of this Arkansas airport, it was that town.
Yeah. I'm surprised I don't have
all the old hot rod guys that are going to be listening. They're screaming his name right now.
Oh, of course, and you'll find out tomorrow. The first electronic part that I had that I was exposed to, do you remember when the HEI ignition, the large cap distributor, that came out in about 74? And I went to the GM mechanics class, whatever they called it, in Burbank, California. I took the class that they were giving all their dealer mechanics. And so I could do a magazine story on HEI ignition. And of course, that threw away the points and the condenser, and you just had this little module. I just thought, black box. I mean, this is another world. But it was the mid to late 70s when all of these parts started coming in, and that should have given us all a clue that the industry as we knew it was going away.
Speaking of HEIs, my dad liked to get his. He's got sausage fingers.
Mark Campbell.
Mark Campbell.
Yeah,
your wife looked it up. Carrie's trying to. Yeah, Mark Campbell.
My wife comes up and she goes, "Here's your old Rolodex."
Yeah. So I remember my dad liked to get his sausage fingers around the distributor, so I can't count how many Tri-5 Chevys we took a big hammer and dinged in the firewall so we could get that HEI distributor in the car. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, you guys start in the Garage Media. Did you start with all three titles right from the start? Mm-hmm. Which Rob Fortier runs the truck magazine. Mm-hmm. With Nick Latata. Mm-hmm. So, do you guys have, with today's technology, people can work remotely? Do you guys have an office that you all go to, or most of your stuff work remotely? I figured with his, he's a good looking man, right? I figured he would be remotely working every day from the beach because he's got a really good tan. Oh, okay, okay. So, if you work from home, do you put pants on every day? Please do not stand up.
So are we.
I have pajama shorts on, is what I have on. So, Carrie works remotely most of the time, unless she's off running events. So she gets to work with some of your older maybe people from Motor Trend because her company FM3 runs Hot Rod Power Tour. They also run Roadkill events, and they run with Holly. They run all the Holly events. So yeah, Carrie gets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Roadkill. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, we don't do drag week. They do that one on their own, but yeah. Yep.
I guarantee you, if I know these guys and how they put out a great product. They're not, as they say, phoning it in. Like Carrie, even though we were gone all weekend, we got home late last night. I wait for a friend to show up, and she went to bed. Left her 10 last night, exhausted. She wakes up at 4 o'clock. She can't get back to sleep. She gets up, goes in her office, turns on, and starts working at 4 o'clock. And of course, she's got a big Ford Fest event this weekend, but she does that more often than not. That she's up at 3:30, 5 o'clock.
I wouldn't have been up at 4 o'clock this morning had you not screamed in the middle of the night because you were having a nightmare.
So I don't know what I was dreaming about, but I got, and she woke me up. I don't remember that dream, but I did dream later that I remember that I bought a pair of Crocs. And that's nightmare, right? That's like under New Balance shoes of buying a pair of Crocs. So yeah, I don't know if that was my nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. It's our cats let us live here. It's their place.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're just their we're their treat dealer. That's all we are. Yeah. Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. See, I usually wake up at 3, but it's just to pee, then I go back to bed. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can your wife still hear us? Does she enjoy having you work from home?
Aw. Yeah.
Mm. See, I do more cooking here than Carrie does. I like to cook,
He
so
does.
I always try to return her to her mom, and her mom says no returns or you don't have the receipt or yeah. I try that.
I can't stay focused long enough to cook.
Yeah. But the problem is with working from home, she makes a few things very good. She makes great enchiladas and Mexican lasagna. But when she starts cooking, since she works from home, same thing like you in the middle of the night. Oh, she starts an email, gets an email, or her phone rings any time of the day, night, and then she's off to the office, and then I'm eating a burnt frozen pizza. So I've learned that just I and she won't use the timer because she says nobody tells me what to do. So I do most of the cooking. Yeah,
Yep.
I like to cook. I do. I like to cook.
Yep.
Okay, so the magazines are going good. How many? So you're sneaking up on 5 years now running the magazines? Yep. Wow. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And the industry is so strong. There's plenty of podcasts, and Raina's doing a great job with coverage, and you guys did a great job coverage of the Triple Crown. But that Triple Crown show had 160 some vendors, almost 3,300 cars. An unbelievable crowd. 2 hours up the road, they're running Holly LS Fest, a little bit different crowd, mostly racing, unbelievable. And they said there was almost 50,000 people through the gates. All the racing categories were sold out. They rent the drag strip and they rent the amusement park. And the first time in 15 years they've been running it, they had to put show car overflow in the amusement park. Usually it's Saturday, but they had to do that for these shows are 2 hours away. Good Guys the same weekend in Colorado had a show. There was a truck show someplace. I mean, everybody says, yeah, Street Rod Nationals ain't like it used to be. The Good Guys, whatever, isn't like it used to be. The Street Machine Nationals is a sliver of itself. But back in the 80s and 90s, there wasn't the C10 Nationals, Bowtie Nationals. Yeah, you had Super Chevy, Street Rod Nationals. KKWA had a handful of events. You didn't. Now you can pick, at least out in this part of the country, every weekend you could drive within 8 hours and pick almost 4 national style events to go to. You didn't have that back in the 80s and 90s. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah, which Triple Crown's a Friday, Saturday. The Tri Fives used to be when they decided to add, it still blows kind of my mind because in the Midwest, the good local car shows were Sunday because most everybody worked on Saturday. Now Sundays fall on their face everywhere. It's a travel day to go home. But when the Tri Five show added a day, they added Thursday. It's a Thursday, Friday, Saturday show. So you still got, not everybody shows up on Thursday, but you still got Sunday to get home. And I think that's good. And so touch back, we got to wrap this up. We've been 2.5 hours now.
This is our longest podcast yet.
Well, no, Daryl Starbird was the longest. He was 3 hours, and we broke him up into 3 sections. So you have officially longer than Jim Cozy was. Without saying yes or no, you can say I can't answer that, or you don't know. Is there any plans in the future to add another title? Is there another? Mm-hmm. 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 Well, I think it is also because of all what you guys have done and how long you've been in the industry. There's a few other new magazines that have popped up. I don't know the guy's name, but I'm just going to say it's a CK Truck magazine. It's just CK Trucks. And the first few issues was really small and thin because of advertising, not know who this guy was. I mean, he doesn't have he's a younger guy. And I don't know if you've ever grabbed that magazine. Now it's getting thicker. He's getting ads because the truck market is huge. And he does an incredible job. The paper's nice and the color and the printing and the articles are good. And they're mostly younger guys running it and they do an amazing job. But like you say, it took them a while to prove themselves a few issues. And like, okay, now the advertisers reporting them. They prove themselves to everybody. When you got Tim Foss and Brian Brennan and Rob Fortier and Nick Licata, and if you're a magazine fan, it's like,
You know those
oh,
names
the guy
already.
at the pizza place that he was the chef. Now he just opened another. We're going to go to that pizza place because you know what you're doing. So,
Fuels your fire.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
And people think there's no magazines. The print industry is still good. Yeah, there's not those 19 titles, and you may not want to talk to other people, but I'm going to. You guys at In the Garage Media do an amazing job on you. And I'm a magazine nerd, and I'd tell you if you weren't doing a good job. And me growing up, I not only am a fan of builders, but I read the articles and meeting Rob Fortier and Nick Licata and you and Tim Foss. It was a big deal to me because I read. It wasn't just the builders because you guys brought all that to my life being in the middle of Illinois. But Riders Journal's coming back. They do a boutique magazine. They do great. The Wheel Hub guys do a modern version, and I mean this in a complimentary of Riders Journal. It's a boutique magazine. I think they kill it. I only get the Wheel Hub. I don't get the truck and I'm definitely not going to get a Mustang magazine. And I get a couple of the truck magazines, the CK ones, and a couple other ones floating around here. Hop Up does like a few issues a year or random, and they all have their little niche, and I think it all works and plays off each other. That everybody's doing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, he's so talented. He stopped by the shop a couple of weeks ago, and yeah. The only thing different I see in the magazine industry, because there is a few less titles. I remember like early 2000s when we talk about the Riviera got in Hot Rod magazine. That year, that car got 6 magazines and 5 covers around the world. We got in Germany and all that stuff. That don't happen anymore. When a photographer comes up to you and they're always like, "Oh, has Modern Rotting got to you yet? Or has Wheel Hub got to you? Or if a traditional car has Riders Journal going to do this?" And you're not really going to see these cars in every magazine, and it's okay because you still got to have your own little niche. Yeah, there's some cars I think deserve to be in more magazines and stuff, like that new Rad Rides Roadster. It can be covered differently by everybody else. That Kindig Corvette can be covered differently by everybody else. But yeah, so again, thank you for what you guys are doing at In the Garage Media. You got a great staff. You guys are just absolutely killing it. I'm excited whenever I get a new issue in the mail. So, and I read them and memorize them like I did as a little kid. So one more thing before we wrap. Carrie's going to get mad. Being a cat person, have you ever been to a professional cat show? They're incredible, aren't they? So we've said this. I forget who we were talking to. I think it was Corey and Ashley Talbert. We were talking about cats and going to this cat show. So I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but remember, like when the ISCA, it's still a big deal, but the ISCA was these touring people, and the points champion got a new car or a new truck and everything. And those 80s, 90s ISCA tour people, they'd slightly dress up for the awards and maybe some frilly fringe jackets and stuff like that. Have you ever wondered where those people ended up if they're not in the car industry anymore? They're at cat shows. The one that we've seen, like we've seen some people dressed up showing their cats and like their 80s ISCA award ceremony stuff. And yeah, but yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So we want to wrap this up. We want to thank Brian Brennan from In the Garage Media, the current editor of Modern Rotting. I want to thank you for taking the time. I'm a little upset your cats did not make an appearance like ours did.
Oh, there we go. Aww. Aww.
Is she the one that keeps is there one cat? I mean, she's been sitting there. Is she the one that watches you the most? Like, what are you doing, Dad?
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how my wife is when I cook. She wants nothing to do with me until it's time to cook her dinner. It's probably cold since she was probably thinking, oh, they're only going to talk an hour, and here we are. Yeah. So sorry for disrupting dinner. We want to thank you for taking the time. This will probably be up, and it's actually going to go up.
It goes up
Yeah,
Wednesday.
it goes up this Wednesday. So
Yep.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, Carrie says it's because I'm a nerd and I know everybody and I know all the little details on who did this or who did that. We don't need to talk about it, but we had a blast sharing the stage during the awards and the pop up auction. And I said about this because we did a couple podcasts talking about the events. I got some hate. Some people were mad that they had to wait for the truck giveaway. I had to block some people on social media. And those are people I don't want in my life because we raised a lot of money for a military foundation with me, you, and Kevin Ostie up there. And it was absolutely incredible. So thanks for being part of that. And again, thank you, Mr. Brennan, for being part of our podcast. And thanks for keeping print alive.
The Strange Motion Way podcast, brought to you by Royal Purple Synthetic Oils.
Royal Purple premium synthetic motor oils and high-performance chemicals have been designed to improve performance in all conditions and provide cleaner operation, better mileage, and decreased oil change frequency. That means less oil changes. With products available for your gasoline and diesel engines, Royal Purple is the obvious choice for your performance needs. Drive with Royal Purple, the synthetic expert.